Story 1. November 17th, 2023. A night that broke a man's heart in ways no one could imagine. James thought he knew his family, his wife, his children, the life they had built together. But that night, everything he believed in shattered quietly and completely. The pain wasn't loud or angry. It was the kind of hurt that settles deep inside. A slow, heavy ache that never lets go. James found a truth so painful it tore at the very core of who he was. A truth that made him question everything he thought was real. He felt betrayed, not just by the people he loved, but by the life he had trusted. The man who had worked so hard to protect and provide suddenly faced a reality he never wanted. A secret that crushed his spirit and left him lost in silence. That night changed everything. It wasn't just a family broken. It was a man undone by the weight of a secret no one saw coming. This is the story of James's heartbreak, the unraveling of trust, and a truth so deep it changed a family forever. And it begins here. James Brooks grew up as the eldest child in a modest household in East Point, Georgia. From an early age, he was known for his quiet determination and a steady sense of responsibility that set him apart from his peers. In primary school, James was a diligent student, one who rarely sought the spotlight, but earned respect through consistency and hard work. Teachers remembered him as attentive and respectful, often helping classmates without fanfare. His childhood was not marked by extravagance, but by a strong foundation of values instilled by his parents. Honesty, discipline, and kindness. During his years in secondary school, James's steady nature deepened into a strong sense of leadership. He was elected class representative several times and was often the voice of reason among his friends. Though not the most outgoing, he had an easygoing charm that drew others to him. He played on the school's basketball team, but never pushed himself to stardom. His focus was on teamwork and supporting others. Outside school, James enjoyed reading historical novels and spending time outdoors, especially hiking in nearby parks. These quiet hobbies balanced his more structured life, providing moments of calm and reflection. As high school graduation approached, James faced the common crossroads of deciding his future. Unlike some of his peers who chased flashy careers or immediate financial gain, James took a more thoughtful path. He enrolled at Georgia State University, choosing to major in education. His decision was driven by a genuine desire to make a positive impact on young lives, inspired in part by teachers who had shaped his own journey. College life suited him well. He maintained a steady GPA, took part in student mentoring programs, and joined the campus community in ways that reflected his quiet leadership. Though he wasn't the life of every party, he made meaningful friendships grounded in shared values. After college, James pursued a career in education, starting as a middle school teacher in Atlanta. His natural ability to connect with students and maintain order in the classroom soon earned him promotions. Colleagues described him as principled and fair, someone who believed discipline was key not just to learning, but to personal growth. Over the years, he climbed the ranks to become assistant vice principal at Douglas Middle School, a role he embraced with a sense of duty and pride. Outside work, James's life was simple but fulfilling. He enjoyed weekend runs through local trails, often using these moments to clear his mind. He was a steady presence for his family and close friends, the person others turned to in times of need. Though he didn't seek attention, his calm and measured approach made him a natural leader both in and out of the workplace. James's easygoing nature masked a deeply principled man, someone who valued trust, loyalty, and order above all else. This foundation would shape not only his career, but also the way he faced the most difficult moments in his life. John Brooks was the younger of the two brothers, born 4 years after James. From the earliest days of his childhood in East Point, John was marked by a restless spirit and a creative spark that set him apart. Unlike James, who was quiet and steady, John was more impulsive and expressive. In primary school, he struggled to sit still in class, his mind often drifting toward drawing or daydreaming. Teachers saw his artistic talent, but worried about his lack of focus. John's report cards showed a mixture of high marks in art and low grades in subjects that required rigid attention. As he moved into secondary school, John's creativity blossomed, but his academic performance remained uneven. He was popular among friends for his humor and easygoing attitude, often the one to break tension with a joke or a sketch. He joined the school art club and spent hours after school painting murals and working on mixed media projects. Sports and structured activities never held his interest for long. Instead, he sought freedom and expression wherever he could find it. His teachers sometimes clashed with him over deadlines and attendance, but many recognized his raw talent and encouraged him to pursue art seriously. After graduating high school, John enrolled at Savannah College of Art and Design, drawn by its reputation for nurturing unconventional artists. College life suited John's personality perfectly. He reveled in the creative atmosphere and the freedom to experiment with different mediums, from sculpture to digital art. He found community among other artists who shared his desire to challenge norms. Yet even in college, John was known for his unpredictability. He would disappear for days to travel or work on projects without telling anyone. His grades fluctuated, and he never followed a strict schedule. To him, art was life, and life was an adventure to be lived fully, without restraint. John's career after college reflected the same restless energy. He bounced from city to city, Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, chasing gallery openings and freelance gigs. He never held a traditional job for more than 6 months, preferring the freedom of contract work, teaching occasional art workshops, or selling his pieces at local markets. His lifestyle was unconventional. At times, he lived in a renovated van, parked near the beach or in artist communities. He was known to enjoy late nights filled with red wine, music, and spontaneous collaborations with other creatives. Despite his carefree exterior, John cared deeply about his art and the people around him. His friends described him as charismatic and warm, someone who could light up a room with his passion. But his unpredictability sometimes strained relationships, as he struggled with commitment and stability. He was not someone who planned far ahead. Instead, he moved with the flow, trusting that his path would reveal itself. John's easygoing life was the mirror opposite of his brother's disciplined routine. Where James woke at 5 a.m. to journal and work long hours, John slept late and followed his own rhythms. Where James sought order, John sought freedom. And yet, despite their differences, they shared the same blood, a bond that would be tested in ways neither could have imagined. How much can shared blood forgive? It was May 5, 2010, when James Brooks first crossed paths with Salome Monroe. The setting was a small community center in downtown Atlanta, where a local nonprofit was hosting a workshop on leadership in education. James had arrived early, notebook in hand, ready to absorb as much as he could. Salome was there in her role as event coordinator, a position that suited her perfectly. From the moment she entered the room, Salome commanded attention, not by raising her voice, but through a quiet confidence that filled the space. Dressed elegantly in a tailored navy dress, her sharp eyes scanned the room with a calm assurance. Her tone was smooth and deliberate. Every instruction she gave delivered with precision. While the speakers prepared, Salome moved effortlessly behind the scenes, organizing materials and coordinating staff. But somehow, even in this supporting role, she held the room's focus as if she were the keynote. James noticed her immediately. He admired her grace and professionalism, but also sensed something deeper, a strength tempered with warmth. They exchanged brief words during a break, discussing the importance of nurturing young minds and the challenges faced in schools like the ones James served. Their conversation flowed naturally, revealing shared values, a commitment to community, a belief in the power of education, and a deep love for children's potential. Salome, at 32, was a communications major from Howard University. She had moved to Atlanta from Baltimore a year earlier, seeking a fresh start after a difficult breakup. Rumors whispered that she had been engaged once, but the relationship had ended quietly, leaving her guarded but determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. Her past was a closed book, shared only in fragments with close friends. James found himself drawn not just to her poise, but to the passion she showed for her work and her values. She didn't flirt or make overt advances. Instead, she created space for him to step forward on his own terms. It was a slow, steady pull rather than a rush. Their first conversation happened during a short break at the leadership workshop. James had just finished jotting down notes when he noticed Salome nearby, organizing some papers with calm efficiency. Gathering his courage, he approached and said, "This event is really well put together. You've done a great job managing everything." Salome looked up, her eyes meeting his with a quiet warmth. "Thank you," she replied smoothly. "It takes a village to pull off something like this. It's rewarding when everything comes together for a good cause." They began talking about the challenges teachers face in urban schools. James shared how he saw the impact of leadership on students' lives firsthand, emphasizing the importance of guidance beyond academics. Salome listened intently and responded thoughtfully. "I've always believed that communication and connection are key, not just between adults, but especially with kids. If they feel heard, they're more likely to thrive." The conversation flowed naturally from there. They exchanged stories about their upbringing. James spoke of his parents' influence in shaping his values. Salome mentioned growing up in Baltimore and how her family always emphasized education. Despite their different paths, they found common ground in their commitment to community and the belief that every child deserves a chance. Before parting ways that day, James hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to continue this conversation over coffee sometime?" Salome smiled, a subtle but genuine expression. "I'd like that," she said simply. Their first official date came 3 weeks later, June 2010, on a Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe nestled in a historic part of Atlanta. Over coffee, they talked for hours about everything from childhood memories to their hopes for the future. Both loved family and believed in building strong foundations for the next generation. They discovered a mutual appreciation for classic literature and jazz music, finding comfort in shared interests despite their different backgrounds. Throughout 2010, they went on several dates. James and Salome found themselves drawn not just to the places they visited, but to the moments shared in between. The comfortable silences, the subtle smiles, the ease of simply being together. At the museum, they admired not only the art, but each other's thoughtful reflections. James appreciated how Salome noticed details he might have missed, while Salome found James's quiet insight grounding and sincere. During their evening walks through Piedmont Park, they talked about everything and nothing. The city lights flickered around them as they strolled slowly, their pace matching a growing rhythm between them. James admired Salome's warmth and her way of listening, not just hearing words, but truly understanding the emotions beneath them. Salome, in turn, valued James's steady presence, his ability to stay calm when life felt overwhelming. Their quiet dinners were where their connection deepened most. Over simple meals, conversations grew more personal. Dreams, fears, childhood memories. They discovered shared hopes for a family built on trust and love. James, who had often guarded his heart carefully, found in Salome a safe place to open up, to show vulnerability without fear of judgment. Salome admired his integrity and the quiet strength that anchored him. Together, they created a space where two very different lives could meet and blend, not by rushing, but by savoring each step. Each date revealed new layers of connection and respect, building a foundation neither expected, but both deeply valued. It was in their company that they found comfort and a promise of something lasting. The day James proposed was quiet and thoughtful, much like the man himself. It was a crisp autumn evening in early November 2011, and he had chosen a small, intimate restaurant tucked away in a tree-lined neighborhood of Atlanta, one they had often talked about visiting but never had the chance. The place was warm, with soft lighting and the gentle murmur of conversations blending into the background. James arrived early, nervous but steady, carrying a small velvet box hidden in his jacket pocket. When Salome arrived, dressed simply but elegantly, her eyes lit up with surprise and warmth. They settled into a corner table by the window, sharing a meal of comfort food they both loved, a roasted chicken with herbs and a side of sweet potatoes, dishes that reminded them of family dinners and home. Throughout the evening, their conversation flowed easily, touching on memories of their early dates and hopes for the future. James watched Salome closely, the way she smiled when she laughed, the softness in her eyes when she spoke of family. As the main course finished, he reached across the table, took her hand gently, and spoke with quiet sincerity. "Salome, from the moment we met, you've challenged me, supported me, and made me believe in something more. I want to build a life with you, one filled with love, trust, and family. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught, and for a moment, silence hung between them. Then she smiled, a smile full of joy, relief, and certainty, and nodded. The restaurant around them seemed to fade away as James slipped the ring onto her finger. It was not a grand spectacle, but a moment of deep meaning, shared between two people who had found in each other a rare and steady love. That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter, one rooted in hope and promise, setting the stage for the family they dreamed of creating together. James and Salome began to plan their marriage with the same thoughtful care that defined their relationship. They wanted their wedding to be a true reflection of their shared values, intimate, meaningful, and surrounded by the people who mattered most. Over the months that followed, they worked together to create a celebration that honored their journey and the family they hoped to build. Their wedding day arrived on August 17, 2012, in a charming garden venue just outside Atlanta. The setting was simple but elegant. Rows of white chairs lined a soft green lawn, framed by blooming magnolia trees and the gentle hum of summer cicadas. Family and close friends gathered, their faces full of warmth and support, witnessing the union of two lives that had already weathered so much together. Salome wore a classic ivory dress that moved gracefully with every step, her expression radiant with happiness and calm confidence. James stood tall in a tailored navy suit, his usual composed demeanor softened by the unmistakable joy in his eyes. The ceremony was filled with heartfelt vows, promises to stand by one another through every challenge, to nurture a family grounded in love and respect. They exchanged rings beneath a canopy of flowers, sealing their commitment with a quiet but profound intimacy. The reception that followed was a celebration of community and connection, with laughter, music, and stories shared late into the evening. Every detail reflected their personalities, the soulful jazz that played softly in the background, the simple but delicious Southern-inspired menu, and the genuine smiles of those who came to witness their beginning. For James and Salome, the wedding was more than just a ceremony. It was a declaration of hope and partnership, a foundation laid for the future they both dreamed of. It marked the start of a new chapter, a family united not only by love, but by the shared belief that together they could face whatever life had in store. After their wedding, Salome moved into the family home that James had inherited from their late parents, a modest yet warm house nestled in a quiet East Point neighborhood. The house carried years of memories within its walls, the laughter of childhood, the comforting routines of family life, but now it took on new life with Salome's presence. The first 2 years were marked by a peaceful rhythm that both James and Salome cherished. Mornings began with soft sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the kitchen as they shared quiet breakfasts. They found comfort in the simple routines, James reading the newspaper while Salome prepared meals, their conversations gentle and easy, filled with plans for the future. Evenings were often spent together on the small porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon as they talked about everything from work to dreams. There was a softness to their time, a quiet romance that grew not from grand gestures, but from steady support and shared moments. They hosted close friends and family, their home filled with warmth, laughter, and the scent of home-cooked meals. Salome brought a touch of elegance to the house, filling it with fresh flowers and soft music that blended seamlessly with the everyday sounds of life. James, once weighed down by responsibility, found a renewed sense of peace in their life together. Their bond deepened through mutual respect and a shared commitment to building a loving family. For those first 2 years, the house was more than just a building. It was a sanctuary where love took root and hope blossomed quietly but firmly. It was a time of calm before the storm, a chapter where the promise of what was to come seemed both real and possible. The phone rang late one evening in March 2015. On the other end was John calling from Dallas. His voice carried a mix of exhaustion and hope as he said simply, "I'm done with the road. Years of drifting between cities, hustling art gigs, and living out of suitcases had worn him down. He wanted to come home to find some stability after the relentless pace of his nomadic life. For many older brothers, that call might have been met with hesitation or doubt, but James answered without hesitation. To him, family was everything. Blood was not just a connection, but a commitment. "Come home," he told John, and so John made plans to return. Salami's reaction to John moving in was surprisingly warm and welcoming. She prepared the guest room herself, carefully selecting linens and arranging fresh flowers, turning the space into a quiet haven. James watched her kindness and took it as a sign. He had chosen the right partner, someone who understood the importance of family. Her openness reinforced his belief that together they could rebuild what had been fractured by years apart. John's return brought a new energy into the house. He began teaching a local art class at the nearby community center, sharing his passion with children who, like him, found refuge in creativity. Once a month, he hosted open studios in the backyard, a chance for neighbors and friends to gather, admire his latest work, and connect over shared appreciation for art. The gatherings were casual, filled with laughter and music, and offered a glimpse of the unity the family presented to the world. Home footage from those days reveals a picture of harmony. James manning the grill during a weekend barbecue, flipping burgers and chatting with neighbors, while John patiently shows Lena how to mix colors on a canvas. The children's laughter echoes through the yard, a soundtrack to moments that seemed, on the surface, to be the perfect blend of family life. Their home became a public symbol of togetherness, a place where brotherly bonds were mended and new relationships formed. To neighbors and friends, it looked like the Brooks family had found their way back to solid ground, their differences set aside in favor of love and support. Yet beneath this calm exterior, subtle tensions began to ripple. Small things unnoticed by outsiders, but enough to unsettle the fragile balance. It was in these quiet spaces, between smiles and shared meals, that the true complexity of their lives started to unfold. The perfect picture, after all, often hides the cracks beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed, the connection grew more evident in small gestures. Salome and John began sharing a playlist of songs, tracks that carried hidden messages, carefully selected lyrics that seemed to speak to their private world. Salome asked to borrow John's sketchbook just to see his latest work. What started as casual curiosity soon became something deeper as she lingered over his drawings, tracing lines with her fingers as if memorizing them. One night, Salome sent John a text quoting a poem he had posted online, a poem he never mentioned to James. The message was brief but loaded with meaning. It was a language that exists long before words confirmed it, a silent communication between two people who understand each other without needing to say everything aloud. Throughout this, James remained focused on his work. Long days at the school, evenings spent planning and preparing for the next challenge. He trusted Salome and believed in the family they had built. His world was busy, filled with responsibilities that left little room for doubt. He saw their interactions as harmless, even welcomed Salami's care for John, interpreting it as kindness toward family rather than something more complicated. But beneath the surface of trust, the quiet exchanges between Salome and John carried weight. Moments passed unnoticed by James but recorded in the growing tension that would soon challenge everything they knew. It was a connection that neither spoke of openly but one that would ripple through their lives in ways no one could have imagined. The unspoken attraction was a thread weaving through their days, soft, subtle, but impossible to ignore once seen. It was a silent language that whispered of secrets yet to be revealed and the consequences that awaited when silence finally broke. Instead of pulling away, John found himself playing along, intrigued by the attention and the quiet power it gave him. He wasn't blind to the consequences. He knew the delicate balance they were walking. But there was something compelling about the dance, the way Salome responded to his presence, the subtle shifts in her voice, the secretive glances exchanged when James was nearby. John began to test the waters gently, sharing more of his art, inviting her into his creative world. He sent her messages late at night, short and cryptic, knowing they would spark a reaction. He noticed how she responded, how her texts grew more frequent, more personal. The shared playlist was no longer just music, it became a conversation, a way to say what couldn't be spoken aloud. In moments alone, their exchanges deepened. He watched as she confided in him, revealing fears and hopes she kept hidden from others. John understood the power he held, and while part of him wrestled with the ethics of it all, another part was drawn to the thrill of connection, especially one so carefully hidden from view. Despite the risks, John was careful not to push too far, keeping their relationship in a space that felt intimate yet undefined. He was aware that their unspoken bond was fragile, balanced on the edge of discovery. But for now, he chose to play the part, the confidant, the secret companion, knowing that every moment they shared added a new layer to the story that was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. The night Salome and John first had sex came quietly, without fanfare. It wasn't planned or dramatic. It was a moment that crept up on both of them, wrapped in lingering glances and attention that neither fully acknowledged until it was impossible to ignore. They found themselves alone in the living room, talking softly about art and dreams, their voices low and intimate. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every word, every touch, a brush of a hand on an arm, a glance that held more meaning than either was ready to admit. It was first a short kiss, then a long one, and within time she was mayoning to his rhythm and body movements. James was running late in school. In those moments, the outside world disappeared. There was no thought of consequences, no awareness of the betrayal in progress. Just two people caught in a fragile moment of connection, seeking something real in the silence between them. The following month brought an unexpected and unspoken consequence. Salome's period did not arrive. At first she dismissed it. Too much stress, a change in routine, but as the days passed the worry grew. One quiet morning, alone in the bathroom, she took a pregnancy test. The result was unmistakable, positive. The secret she and John had shared had left its mark, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed everything. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Fear, confusion, but also a calculated resolve. There was no time for hesitation. She knew what she had to do. Salome acted swiftly, making a decision that would bind the family tighter in lies and silence. She planned to pin the pregnancy on James, to let him believe the child was his. It was a deception born not out of cruelty, but necessity. A way to keep the fragile balance of their lives intact, or so she convinced herself. She rehearsed the story in her mind, imagining how she would tell James, how he might react. She pictured his pride, the joy he would feel at the thought of becoming a father once more. It was easier to cloak the truth in love and hope than to unravel the tangled web that had begun to form. Behind closed doors, Salome's world shifted. The secret they shared no longer belonged only to her and John. It had extended its reach, threatening to rewrite the future for all of them. Every smile, every touch between her and James now carried a hidden weight, a truth carefully hidden beneath layers of silence. The decision marked a turning point, a choice to move forward with a lie that would soon demand more than anyone was prepared to give. Act 6. The children arrive. On April 22, 2017, the Brooks family welcomed twin daughters, Lena and Livia. Their arrival brought joy and hope, a new chapter in the life James and Salome had built together. The house was filled with the soft sounds of baby coos and gentle laughter. Family gatherings became celebrations of milestones, first smiles, first steps, and the endless curiosity of two young girls discovering the world. 2 years later, on May 19, 2019, a baby boy named Luke joined the family. James was often seen pushing a stroller through the quiet streets of East Point, his face reflecting a mix of pride and quiet contentment. Birthdays were marked with balloons, homemade cakes, and the warmth of loved ones gathered to celebrate the children's growth and happiness. But as the children grew, subtle questions began to arise among family and friends. Observers couldn't help but notice something familiar. Luke's features, his mannerisms, bore a striking resemblance to John. His smile, the shape of his eyes, even the way he tilted his head were echoes of his uncle's youth. These observations were never spoken aloud in James's presence, but the whispers lingered at family dinners and casual conversations. When James noticed these similarities, he felt a quiet unease but pushed it aside. Salome dismissed the concerns with easy laughter, calling them coincidences or the result of genetics playing tricks. She urged others not to read too much into it, steering the conversation away whenever it arose. James's love for his children was profound and unwavering, a steady force that shaped much of his life. From the moment Lena and Livia arrived, he embraced fatherhood with a quiet devotion that ran deep beneath his composed exterior. He was the kind of father who noticed every small detail, the way Lena's eyes sparkled when she learned something new or how Livia's laughter could brighten even his toughest days. He took pride in the everyday moments, helping with bedtime stories, tying shoelaces, and cheering loudly at their little league games. James was patient and attentive, often putting his work aside to be fully present. He reveled in teaching them about the world around them, the changing seasons, the constellations above, the importance of kindness and respect. With Luke, his bond grew just as strong. James adored the boy's curiosity and energy, often spending weekends building puzzles or teaching him how to ride a bike. He was fiercely protective, always ensuring their safety and happiness. Friends and family saw him as a devoted dad, a man whose pride in his children was unmistakable. Though James carried heavy burdens privately, with his children he was gentle and open. Their smiles softened the weight of his worries, and their unconditional love was a sanctuary amid life's storms. He dreamed of giving them a childhood filled with security, laughter, and love, the very foundation he believed every child deserved. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of the family's daily life, James and Salome maintained a private connection of their own, one that was quieter, more guarded than before. Their interactions were marked by stolen moments, a brief kiss exchanged in the kitchen when no one else was around, a whispered conversation in the garage away from prying eyes. These were fragments of intimacy that reminded them of their bond, even as unspoken tensions simmered beneath the surface. But this time, there was a new caution in their closeness. The arrival of the children had brought joy, yes, but also complexities they both felt keenly. Neither James nor Salome wanted to risk another pregnancy. The weight of their hidden truths and the fragile balance of their family life made the prospect of more children unthinkable. Their private moments were tinged with this careful restraint, a mutual understanding that, while they still needed each other, boundaries had to be respected. The kisses were softer, the conversations more measured. It was a delicate dance of connection and distance, shaped by fear and the desire to keep the fragile peace intact. In these hidden exchanges, James and Salome tried to hold on to something real between them, even as the quiet fractures around them grew wider. Their relationship had shifted, evolving into something complicated and cautious, a reminder that beneath appearances, no family is ever truly simple. As time passed, the closeness that once defined James and Salome's marriage began to fade, replaced by an increasing distance that neither could fully explain or confront. Though they still shared the same bed each night, the space between them felt wider than the mattress could hold. Conversations that once flowed easily became strained or disappeared altogether. They found themselves drifting into silence, sitting side by side but worlds apart. There were nights when James would wake up, expecting to find Salome beside him, only to realize she was gone, her side of the bed cold and empty. At first, he told himself it was just a momentary absence. Maybe she needed to cool off or was restless. But these nights grew more frequent, and with each one, a quiet ache settled deeper inside him. He began to wonder what kept her from staying close, what thoughts pulled her away into the darkness of the house. During the day, their interactions became transactional, quick words about schedules or household tasks, rather than the warm exchanges that had once brought comfort. The laughter that had filled their home seemed to echo from a distant memory. James felt a growing sense of isolation, even in the presence of his wife, as if they were two strangers sharing a space rather than partners sharing a life. Salome, too, seemed to retreat into herself, guarded and distant. Her smiles became less frequent, her eyes often clouded with something James couldn't reach. When he tried to bridge the gap, she would respond with quiet deflections or change the subject. The emotional walls between them grew higher with each passing day. The silence was heavy, filled with unasked questions and unmet needs. Both sensed the fractures, but neither dared to voice the pain or admit the widening divide. In those long, lonely nights, James lay awake wondering if the woman he had loved and trusted was still beside him at all, or if she had already slipped away somewhere he couldn't follow. One night, unable to shake the growing unease, James quietly rose from bed and followed Salome as she slipped out of the house. His steps were slow and careful, barely making a sound as he trailed her into the garage. There, beneath the dim glow of a single overhead bulb, he saw her kneeling on the cold concrete floor. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke to herself, the words lost in the stillness of the night. In her hands was a red envelope, small, worn at the edges, but clearly important. James didn't interrupt. He stood frozen in the shadows, heart pounding so loudly it threatened to betray his presence. After a moment he turned and slipped back inside, retreating to the silence of his bedroom. But sleep would not come. His mind raced, filled with questions and a growing knot of dread. The following night, Salome stayed inside and James lay awake, restless and haunted by what he had seen. The quiet of the house felt heavier, suffocating. Every creak, every shadow seemed to echo the secret he feared was waiting for him. On the third night, he couldn't resist watching again. At the same hour, she left the bedroom and moved with the same deliberate steps toward the garage. The ritual repeated itself. The kneeling, the whispering, the clutching of the red envelope. James's chest tightened with every breath he took. He knew then that this was no fleeting moment, no harmless habit. This was a secret, carefully guarded and waiting to be uncovered. He realized it was time to face whatever truth lay hidden in that envelope. Whatever it was, it had already begun to unravel the family he had worked so hard to protect. November 17th, 2023 arrived. Salome had gone for a spa visit. James waited patiently, the minutes stretching long as he prepared himself for what he was about to do. When the moment came, he moved swiftly yet carefully to the garage, the place that had become the setting of so many unanswered questions. The metal toolbox sat locked tight, a barrier that held more than just tools. It held the secret that had been haunting him for months. Taking a small set of picks from a drawer in the kitchen, he knelt and began the delicate work of unlocking the box. Each subtle click echoed in the stillness, his heart pounding in rhythm with the lock's resistance. When the lid finally swung open, the first thing that caught his eye was a folder clearly marked, "Truth, if he ever asks." The words seemed to mock him, a stark invitation to face what was hidden. Inside the folder were 3 manila envelopes, each neatly labeled with a date spanning several months. With trembling hands, James opened the first envelope. Inside was a DNA test result, accompanied by a handwritten note from Salome that chilled him to the bone. The test revealed that Lena was not his daughter, 0% match. The second envelope confirmed the same for Livia, the twins born just months apart, yet neither his. The third, bearing Luke's name, held the final devastating confirmation. He was not the biological father of any of the 3 children. Each envelope included the same cold message in Salame's handwriting: "You should have stayed home more." The words cut deeper than any physical wound, a reminder of time lost, of trust broken, and of a family built on deception. As James sat there in the dim light of the garage, the reality of what he had just uncovered began to sink in with crushing force. His hands trembled slightly as he held the DNA results, each page a confirmation of a betrayal so deep it shattered his very sense of self. The children he had loved, protected, and dreamed of raising as his own were not his by blood. That truth hit him harder than any blow. A profound ache settled into his chest, spreading through his entire body like a slow-burning fire. It wasn't just anger or confusion. This was heartbreak in its rawest form. The future he had imagined, the family he had fought so hard to keep together, suddenly felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Every memory flashed before his eyes: the first smile of his daughters, the way Luke's tiny hand had clung to his finger, the quiet moments of bedtime stories and whispered promises. all now tangled with the bitter sting of deception. His mind raced with questions that had no answers. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? How could the woman he trusted so completely carry such a secret? And perhaps most painful of all, how could the brother he loved be part of this? Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the papers in his hands. The man known for his calm and control now felt raw and vulnerable, his heart breaking in silence. The betrayal was not just about the children's parentage. It was the shattering of every truth he had held dear. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. The weight of grief pressed down on him, heavier than any physical burden. It was a loneliness so deep it echoed through the empty garage, a silence that screamed louder than any words could. James was left to sit with the fragments of a life undone, his heart broken in ways he had never imagined possible. He stepped back into the house, the envelope still heavy in his pocket, trying to push the weight of what he'd discovered aside and carry on with his day. But the walls that once felt like a refuge now seemed to close in around him, each room echoing with silence and secrets. Every familiar sound, the ticking clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator felt alien, as if the very foundation of his life had shifted beneath him. This was more than betrayal, it was an abomination, a violation of everything he believed family to be. The people he trusted most, his wife and his brother, had torn apart the very fabric of his world. The pain, initially raw and overwhelming, slowly hardened into a cold, simmering anger that settled deep within him. It wasn't the kind of anger that demanded immediate confrontation. It was quiet, deliberate, a fire that burned steadily and with purpose. James knew that facing Salome now would change everything. Words spoken in haste could shatter what little remained. So instead, he made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. He would not plead, he would not beg for answers. He resolved to end what he saw as the corruption that had infiltrated his family. That night, the house was filled with the familiar warmth of family life. James moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing dinner with care. The aroma of roast chicken mingled with the sweetness of candied yams and the comforting richness of mac and cheese, dishes he knew were favorites of the children. The soft laughter of Lena and Livia echoed from the dining room as they played nearby, while Salome hummed a gentle tune, her presence filling the space with a quiet grace. James watched them all, a small, almost imperceptible smile crossing his lips. He said nothing. The smiles, the laughter, the simple happiness, it all felt like a fragile illusion, one he was about to shatter. As the meal came together, James reached for a bottle of prescription sleep medication. He crushed the pills into a fine powder, mixing it carefully into the gravy that would coat the chicken. Each step was methodical, deliberate, a stark contrast to the life that hummed obliviously around him. He served the plates, placing portions before Salome, John, and the children. None of them suspected what had been added to their meal. They ate with the carefree innocence of a family gathered in love, unaware that beneath the surface, everything was unraveling. The medications took hold slowly, pulling the family into a deep, peaceful sleep. Eyes fluttered closed, bodies relaxed, and the quiet house settled into a stillness that felt both unnatural and final. One by one, James lifted each child from their sleeping spots. The twins cradled gently in his arms, Luke resting against his chest with the softness of innocence still lingering. Salome was last, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily upon his shoulders, but his movements were steady, controlled. He carried them into the garage, first the twins, then Mark. He came back to pick John, and with a face full of rage, he carried Salome into the garage, a space transformed from a place of utility into something cold and clinical. The concrete floor was covered with layers of newspaper, carefully laid out to catch any trace of evidence. The room was silent, stripped of the familiar warmth of home, bathed only in the harsh glare of a single overhead light. Everything was arranged with meticulous care, as if choreographed in advance. He was going to end it where he found the truth. His next actions were deliberate, calculated. This was not chaos, it was order taken to an unimaginable extreme. He got a knife and stabbed each of them in the heart. That meal was their last supper. At exactly 4:46 a.m. on November 14, 2023, James Brooks walked through the front doors with an unhurried, almost deliberate step. Appeared calm, his maroon sweater stained dark at the front, the signs of blood unmistakable. In his right hand, he held a sealed brown envelope, carried with a strange reverence, as if it were a document of finality. The officer at the front desk later recounted the encounter with a mixture of disbelief and unease. He walked in like he was returning a library book, the officer said. There was blood on his hands, blood under his nails. But there was no panic, no frantic energy, just calm, quiet, a man who had made peace with what he'd done. Without hesitation, James placed the envelope carefully on the counter. His voice, steady and clear, filled the room. I've removed an abomination from the earth. The weight of those words hung heavily, carrying the gravity of what would soon be revealed. Inside the envelope were 3 sets of DNA test results, each meticulously dated and accompanied by handwritten notes in red ink. Notes that detailed the paternity of Lena, Livia, and Luke. The tests confirmed what James had discovered weeks before, but this time the evidence was in his hands and laid bare before the law. The officers James led him back to the family home without hesitation. He produced keys and unlocked the garage door himself. What the officers encountered inside was unlike anything many had ever seen. The room was sterile, methodically arranged, with every detail deliberate. The sight was so overwhelming that one officer turned and left the scene, unable to continue, overcome with nausea. Throughout the process, James remained composed, offering no resistance or protest. When pressed for explanation, he spoke simply, "The house was sacred. They made it unclean." His words were heavy with conviction, a man who believed he had done what was necessary to restore order. This confession marked the turning point in the case, transforming a family tragedy into a complex examination of betrayal, loyalty, and the boundaries of justice. The calm with which James faced his actions only deepened the chilling nature of the crime, raising questions that would echo far beyond the walls of the courtroom. In February 2024, the trial of James Brooks commenced at Fulton County Superior Court, drawing intense public attention and widespread media coverage. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as reporters, advocates, and curious onlookers packed the seats, eager to witness the unfolding drama of a family torn apart by secrets and tragedy. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait of premeditation. The lead prosecutor argued that this was no crime of passion or momentary lapse in judgment. This was not a snap decision, she told the jury. It was a ceremony, a calculated act carried out with cold precision. James Brooks did not react to betrayal. He planned his response with careful intent. James's defense attorney, Blaine Rowe, offered a starkly different narrative. He acknowledged the horror of the crimes, but argued that James's mental state was compromised. Citing a diagnosis of brief reactive psychosis triggered by extreme emotional trauma, Blaine claimed James suffered from obsessive-compulsive tendencies rooted in a rigid and oppressive upbringing. He asked the jury to consider diminished capacity, emphasizing that James was not fully in control of his actions when he committed the unthinkable. Throughout the trial, psychiatric evaluations offered conflicting perspectives. Some experts testified that James was legally sane and fully aware of his actions, while others suggested that he experienced moral displacement, a psychological response where intense betrayal clouds judgment and distorts reality. The debate over his mental state added a complex layer to the case, challenging the jury to navigate the murky intersection of law and psychology. Witnesses painted a detailed picture of James's life before the tragedy. Co-workers described him as a dedicated and principled man, always committed to his students and colleagues. Church members recalled his quiet devotion to faith and community service. An ex-girlfriend spoke softly of a man who was loving, but intensely private, someone who struggled to share his deepest feelings even with those closest to him. A pivotal moment came when Eddie Wallace, a longtime neighbor, took the stand. He recounted overhearing a heated argument between Salome and John behind the garage. According to Eddie, Salome accused John of saying, "The baby looks too much like me," a comment that hinted at the fractures hidden beneath the family's public facade. This testimony gave the jury a glimpse into the tension simmering behind closed doors. After weeks of testimony and closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. 6 days later, they returned with a verdict that echoed the weight of the evidence. James Brooks was found guilty on all counts. The sentence was life without the possibility of parole, a decision that underscored the gravity of the crimes and the irreversible damage done. At sentencing, the judge asked James if he wished to speak. He rose slowly, his face calm, eyes steady. In a voice measured but resolute, he said, "They were never mine. I was just keeping someone else's secret." Those words lingered in the courtroom long after he sat down, a haunting reminder of a man broken by betrayal, caught between love and devastation, and forever changed by a truth that no family should have to bear. The story of James Brooks is a stark reminder of how betrayal can shatter even the strongest foundations. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Story 2. January 14th, 2022. Paramedics entered and moved quickly into an apartment with the intention to save a life. But it was too late, and what met them wasn't chaos or violence, but the stillness of something that had ended quietly, without struggle, without sound. Just weeks ago, she always said smart men don't cheat, and smart men don't hurt you. He was quiet, sharp, respectful, and always seemed one step ahead. She didn't question it. She felt safe in the way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he made her feel seen. She had celebrated love under city lights, said yes to a man who made her feel seen, protected, chosen. And now here she was, still dressed in comfort, lips parted slightly, with no one left to explain how forever came undone in the middle of the night. And that's the part that lingers. Because if Linda Freeman couldn't see the danger standing next to her, what makes any of us so sure we would? Linda Freeman was born in 1966 to two public school teachers in Harlem, New York. Her mother taught English, her father taught math. Both believed in education, hard work, and showing up, even when no one clapped for you. Linda grew up in a modest apartment off Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. It was tight, loud, full of love, but full of pressure too. Her parents never argued in front of her, but she understood early that love didn't always last. By 13, she had decided that her future would not depend on anyone else's paycheck, mood, or promises. She earned a full scholarship to Howard University, where she majored in finance and graduated top of her class. From there, she climbed fast. Investment firms, global banks. She moved from DC to London, then finally to Atlanta, where she built a life most people only imagined. She didn't just work in finance, she mastered it. Mergers, acquisitions, risk. By her late 40s, she was advising international hedge funds, managing portfolios that stretched across 3 continents, and mentoring young black women entering the corporate world. Colleagues described her as elegant, focused, and hard to fool. She owned 2 homes, one in Midtown Atlanta and another just outside Savannah. She drove a black Range Rover, wore cream suits, and always had on her signature red lipstick. She didn't go to church every Sunday, but she prayed. She didn't need to be married, but she still believed in love. Her circle was small, mostly women who had been through it, women who didn't sugarcoat anything. Her best friend Vanessa Holmes called her the sharpest woman in any room and said Linda could read people in 10 seconds flat. She trusted few, believed even fewer. And after her second divorce, she said she was done with men who were impressed by her money but threatened by her strength. She had built a life around discipline and distance, the kind of life where every piece was placed exactly where she wanted it. But still, she kept an extra toothbrush in her guest bathroom, just in case, because deep down, there was still a part of Linda that wanted someone who stayed. Not for what she had, but for who she was. That was her weakness. And that's where the door cracked open. Linda Freeman got married for the first time in 1994, at the age of 28, to a man named Gregory Slater. They met at a finance seminar in Baltimore. He worked in commercial real estate, confident, sharp dresser, 10 years older. He was the first man who ever made her feel like being smart wasn't something to hide. They got married after 11 months of dating. It was a city hall wedding. No church, no big gathering, just a few family members, her best friend Vanessa, and a quiet dinner afterward. Linda was still building her career then, working long hours in D.C., often flying out to client meetings in New York or Chicago. Gregory promised he understood. He said he admired her ambition. But after the honeymoon phase wore off, Gregory changed. He didn't like that she worked late. He accused her of choosing clients over him. He made comments about her suits, her salary, the way she walked into a room like she owned it. Linda tried to hold the marriage together. She cut back her travel, made more dinners at home. But the more she gave, the more he resented her. By 1997, the emotional distance had become routine. Gregory had moved into the guest room. He barely spoke to her unless he needed something. She found receipts from hotel stays and a necklace hidden in his gym bag, one she never received. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said, "You act like you don't need a man, so I found someone who does." That was the last conversation they had as husband and wife. Linda filed for divorce in April 1998. She was 32, no children, no settlement. She didn't want anything from him, not even an apology. After that, Linda threw herself back into work. Promotions came fast, bigger contracts, international clients. She traveled constantly. Her confidence grew. Her wardrobe changed. She became the version of herself she used to be nervous about becoming. Powerful, director, unapologetic. Then, in 2006, she met Julian Cross, an Ivy League investment lawyer living in London. She was 40, confident and accomplished, and he was 43, polished, well-traveled, and fluent in the language of finance and power. They met during a high-stakes merger involving a UK hedge fund and her firm's European portfolio. And from the first meeting, there was mutual respect, quick wit, and what felt like equal ground. Julian didn't ask her to slow down, didn't question her schedule, and didn't need her to shrink for him to feel like a man. He admired her work ethic, her discipline, and her sharp eye for detail. They moved quickly. Flights between Atlanta and London became routine, and late-night calls turned into weekends spent together in quiet restaurants, wine bars, and boardrooms. 6 months later, he proposed. They were married in Barcelona at a cliffside villa, with friends and colleagues raising glasses as the sun dipped into the sea. The wedding looked like something from a magazine, linen suits, handwritten vows, and soft music echoing through the garden. But real life didn't last long. As Linda continued to rise, so did the silence on Julian's end. By 2008, her name was in financial publications, her face was on global business panels, and her firm had just handed her the kind of promotion that made headlines. She was traveling more, earning more, and commanding more respect than ever before. But instead of being proud, Julian pulled away. He became colder, more distant, rarely visited Atlanta, and started ignoring her calls. He said less and showed up even less. And when she asked what was wrong, he only said she didn't need him anymore. One Monday morning, after a quiet weekend at home, Julian left the house with a single bag and never returned. No argument, no final conversation, just a voicemail that said, "You've already won. You don't leave space for anyone else." Linda filed for divorce in September 2009 at 43 years old. He never fought it, never asked for anything, and never showed his face again. There was no scandal, no money taken, no cheating revealed, just absence. And somehow that hurt more than betrayal ever could because she had chosen him carefully. She thought choosing a man who matched her world meant choosing safety. Instead, he walked away the moment he realized he couldn't keep up with her. After Julian, she stopped hoping for forever. She poured everything back into her work, focused on mentorship, growth, and solitude. She didn't need anyone, and she lived like it. But every now and then, in the quiet moments, she still wondered if there was someone out there who would stay. Not because he had something to gain, but because he saw her for who she truly was. After Julian, Linda swore off marriage completely. She dated occasionally, but nothing serious. She told Vanessa, "If I ever love again, he'll have to meet me at my level. I won't shrink anymore." Linda loved children and had longed to carry her own, but the timing was never right, and the right man never stayed long enough to make it possible. She had frozen her eggs once in her early 40s, just in case, but the procedure didn't go well, and the doctor's tone at the follow-up was gentle in a way that said the door was quietly closing. Most days, Linda kept busy. She worked long hours by choice. She met clients for lunch, ran 3 miles on the treadmill, got her nails done every Friday, and made time for quiet dinners with Vanessa or calls with her sister Yolanda. From the outside, it looked like she had balance, discipline, purpose. And in many ways, she did. But no one saw what happened after 9 p.m. Because once the emails stopped, the TV dimmed, and the last glass of wine hit the sink, she was alone with her thoughts. She would light a candle in the kitchen, take off her heels, and just stand there for a few seconds longer than needed, listening to the stillness. Her house was big, too big for one person, and she felt it most when the air conditioning kicked on and she mistook it for footsteps. Sometimes she opened her bedroom window just to hear noise from the street. Sirens, a dog barking, a car pulling into a neighbor's driveway. Anything that reminded her the world was still going on, even if her world had started to feel paused. She didn't say it out loud, but deep down, she was craving something real. Not chaos, not romance wrapped in pressure. Just someone to sit across from her at the table and ask how her day was. Not because they had to, but because they cared. She missed touch, missed conversation that wasn't about numbers, projections, or deals. She missed the feeling of being chosen, not admired, not envied, but wanted. Sometimes she'd imagine what it might be like to come home to someone who had already started dinner, someone who reached for her hand without her asking, someone who stayed. But she never let those thoughts linger too long. She had trained herself not to, because women like Linda, women who knew better, who had been through enough, who built everything from the ground up, didn't wait around for love. They didn't beg for it. They didn't expect it. Still, the silence in her house had weight. And no matter how strong she looked during the day, it was in the stillness of night that her loneliness pressed the hardest. And that's what made her vulnerable. Because when the wrong kind of love finally showed up, it didn't come loud. Came quiet, patient, warm, and Linda welcomed it. Because the truth is, strength doesn't mean you stop needing people. It just means you learn how to suffer without making a sound. Tyrone Maddox was born on February 11, 1994 in Augusta, Georgia. Or at least that's what he told people. His HR file listed a degree in data science from Georgia State University. No disciplinary issues. No prior job history longer than 2 years. Clean record. Clean appearance. Clean answers. He said he was raised by an aunt after both parents died in a car accident when he was 9. There were no photos. No obituary records linked to his last name. He never shared family stories. Never mentioned birthdays. Holidays were just another day to him. He kept to himself, didn't talk about growing up, and changed the subject whenever someone asked what part of Augusta he was from. Co-workers chalked it up to loss. Some said he probably didn't like reliving his past. But the truth was no one could verify it. He came into Linda Freeman's firm on April 14, 2021 as a junior data analyst. Quiet hire. No big welcome. He worked in a low-traffic corner of the analytics floor, often staying later than his supervisors and keeping every file perfectly documented. His reports were spotless. His emails professional. His timing impeccable. First, no one looked at him twice. He didn't stand out in meetings. He didn't make friends at work. He never joined happy hour, skipped birthday cakes, and rarely smiled unless someone asked him a direct question. But those who paid attention noticed he always knew more than he let on. He spoke like someone older, moved like someone trained. Every sentence was measured, and he only gave you what you asked for. Never more. He was the kind of man who kept his browser history clear and his phone face down. He didn't wear headphones, but no one ever heard music from his desk. His office badge never triggered after-hours alerts, and the security guard said he always walked to his car without looking around, as if he didn't care who watched him, because he had nothing to hide, or because he had already hidden everything. His presence felt useful, not intrusive. Quiet, not strange. Smart, not threatening. And that's what made him dangerous. He knew exactly how close to get without causing alarm. He started appearing in Linda's schedule more often. Early morning data reviews, end-of-day briefings, occasional coffee runs before quarterly presentations. She thought she was guiding a young talent, helping someone from humble beginnings rise through the ranks. She admired his work ethic. She respected his silence. She never asked where he lived. He never offered. She didn't question his past, because nothing in the present gave her a reason to. Her friends started to notice the shift. She smiled more during calls. She canceled less. Her voice softened when she spoke about her days. Vanessa Holmes remembered the first time Linda mentioned him, saying, "He listens like no one ever has. It's quiet, but it's real." Private dinners followed. He never made a move, never pushed, just sat across from her with calm eyes and careful words, listening like the only thing that mattered in the world was her voice. It started simple. A late evening at the office turned into an invitation for coffee downstairs. She had just finished reviewing a complicated quarterly breakdown, and he happened to walk past her office as she stood stretching at her desk. He asked if she wanted a break. Just 10 minutes. Just coffee. Nothing formal. She said yes. They didn't sit close. They didn't talk about anything personal. He asked about her opinion on a trending tech stock. She asked him where he learned to code so efficiently. He said he taught himself. He kept it light. She appreciated that. A few days later, he asked if she had eaten lunch. She hadn't. He offered to walk with her to a bistro 2 blocks away. No pressure, just convenience. They ate fast, mostly talked about work, and he offered to pick up the check. She declined. He didn't argue. It wasn't a date. Not yet. It didn't feel like flirting. It felt comfortable. Easy. But over time, those moments started repeating. It moved from quick lunches to shared rides to conferences, from spontaneous coffee breaks to dinners after long meetings. He always framed it around convenience. "I'm heading that way anyway. Thought you might like this place. I remembered you said you hate eating late alone." And it worked. She never saw the shift as dangerous. It never felt forced. He didn't come too close, didn't compliment her appearance, didn't cross any obvious lines. He was respectful, always on time, always well-dressed, and always had something thoughtful to say. He never asked about her past. He let her share on her own time, and when she did, little by little, he just listened. No judgment, no advice, just quiet understanding. What began as chance became choice. She started saving him a seat in meetings, started expecting his messages after hours, started waiting for him to mention lunch before she made other plans. He began suggesting new restaurants, places she hadn't tried but quickly loved. Italian, Ethiopian, farm-to-table fusion tucked into the corners of the city where no one recognized her. She noticed that he never made a move. He never touched her, never even brushed against her arm. Felt safe, almost innocent, like two people who simply understood each other. She thought she was mentoring him. He was memorizing her. He knew what perfume she wore when she wanted to feel powerful. He watched how she folded her napkin when she was distracted. He paid attention to her moods, her routines, her language, and the way she reacted when someone finally made her feel seen. And he used it all. Linda didn't notice how fast the trust formed. She thought she was in control, that she was leading the pace, that she was choosing him. But he wasn't just working at the firm. He was working his way into her world, into her home, into her heart. And what she believed was safety was only the beginning of something carefully designed. Fridays turned into dinner nights. Tuesdays were coffee and data. She started getting dressed with his quiet presence in mind. Nothing obvious, just small choices. She started sharing more about her childhood, about her father's passing, her mother's strength, her second marriage. And still, he never judged. He never pushed. He just stayed close, exactly where she seemed to want him. What Linda didn't see, what no one saw, was that this wasn't coincidence. This was construction. Because every time she let him a little closer, he noted the rhythm. Every story she shared became a puzzle piece. Every meal, a moment where the walls came down without her realizing it. She thought it was happening naturally. but it was happening exactly how he planned. For months after, precisely August, Tyrone Maddox moved into Linda Freeman's home. There was no big conversation, no formal announcement. It started with a few shirts left in the guest room closet, then a pair of shoes near the front door, then his laptop on the marble kitchen counter. Before long, his cologne was on her bathroom shelf and his name was on the lease. Linda didn't question it. She welcomed it, felt natural, like the next step in something calm and solid. He was respectful of her space, made the bed in the mornings, kept her favorite coffee stocked, and offered to take care of errands before she even mentioned them. She told Vanessa, "It feels nice to come home and not be alone." In October, when the leaves in Atlanta had just started to change, their first fall together, Tyrone waited until the end of a long work week. Linda had just gotten home from a strategy meeting that ran late. She kicked off her heels, walked into the kitchen, and found him there, her favorite playlist playing low, dinner on the stove, wine already breathing on the counter. She didn't notice the ring box right away, not until he reached for her hand and said, without theatrics, "I know what I want, and I don't need more time to know it." Then he opened it. No speech, no kneeling, just his eyes on hers and the box in his palm. It wasn't flashy. A simple cushion-cut diamond on a thin gold band. Elegant, quiet, like him. She hesitated for a moment, not out of doubt but out of disbelief. She was 57, twice divorced. He was 29, no kids, no baggage, and he was asking to marry her like it wasn't a question, just a decision they were ready for. She said yes. There was no announcement, no engagement photos, just a text to Vanessa that read, "It's happening," he asked. And 2 months later, on a crisp December evening, they got married. It was a private rooftop ceremony in downtown Atlanta. No photographers, no big guest list, just 10 close friends, a jazz trio, and an officiant who signed the papers without asking too many questions. She wore a tailored ivory suit. He wore a dark gray one with no tie. They kissed at sunset. To everyone there, it felt real, quiet, mature, almost too quiet. There was no talk of a prenup. Linda said she didn't need one. She had been through enough contracts in her life. This was about trust. Clean, simple trust. That night, after the guests left, they stayed up late on the rooftop, wrapped in coats, drinking red wine from paper cups. She looked out over the city and said, "I never thought I'd get this again." He didn't say much, just held her hand and looked straight ahead. And in the silence of that moment, Linda felt peace. But what she couldn't hear, what she couldn't see, was that while she was planning a future, someone else had already planned the end. January 16th, 2022. Linda had just finished folding towels and was settling into her usual Sunday routine. Bill sorting, inbox clearing, and financial housekeeping. Tyrone was already at the dining table, his laptop open, headphones in. He was working on what he called a quiet side project for a friend's startup. He barely looked up when she sat beside him with a manila envelope, a printed draft of her will, and a pen. She had been meaning to update it for weeks, ever since the wedding. It wasn't emotional, it was practical. Linda approached everything that way. The old version had her sister Yolanda listed as her primary, along with 2 longtime colleagues from her firm. But now, with Tyrone in her life, she told herself it was time to adjust for the new chapter. He was her husband now. It was the adult thing to do. She slid the pages across the table, read every line twice, then pulled out a blue ink pen, and she updated her will. She added him as a primary beneficiary on her $1.5 million life. She looked at him and said, half laughing, "If I die tomorrow, you're a millionaire." He smiled, just enough to register, then looked back at his screen and said calmly, "It makes sense to plan for the future." Then, gently, he suggested opening a new policy in her name, an additional $1 million. He said it would help cover taxes and estate fees, that it was smart, responsible, safe. She laughed, said, "You sound like my advisor." And she signed it. She told her sister, "He's just smart, not greedy. He's thinking ahead." But soon after that, things began to shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't immediate. It started with numbers. Linda noticed small transfers in her account. $1,200 here, $2,000 there, labeled vaguely. She assumed they were automated payments or investment fees. But when she asked Tyrone, he said they were related to some property maintenance he was handling for her Savannah rental. She didn't press it. Then came the trips. He began taking short business trips, usually 2 to 3 days, sometimes over weekends. He claimed they were tied to a side consulting role he was taking on for extra income. He said he didn't want to touch her money. He always returned with receipts, sometimes gifts, sometimes silence. She didn't question the details. But then, one night, while organizing her bathroom drawers, she noticed a lipstick that looked almost identical to her usual shade. Same brand, same packaging, but the formula felt different. It dried her lips. It smelled faintly chemical. She chalked it up to a factory defect and tossed it. But a week later, the same tube was back. She asked him if he had moved her things while cleaning. He said no. She let it go. Soon after, she noticed the door to his home office, the room he once kept open, was now always locked. He said he was working on something confidential, a freelance analytics project for a private client. She respected his privacy. She didn't ask for a key, but deep down something had changed. She felt it in the way he checked her prescriptions before handing them to her, in how he started preparing her coffee without asking how she wanted it, in how he took over small routines until she stopped doing them herself. He never raised his voice, never argued, but something about the silence between them no longer felt peaceful, felt arranged. Still, Linda convinced herself this was what stability looked like. After everything she had been through, she believed comfort was supposed to feel quiet. She didn't know she was being studied, and by the time she started asking the right questions, the damage had already begun. It was a Sunday in late March when it first happened. Linda was at brunch with 2 friends, Vanessa and Yolanda, a usual spot in Buckhead, where they ordered strong coffee, pecan waffles, and spent hours talking about everything from market trends to family drama. That morning, Vanessa noticed Linda looked thinner. Her cheekbones were sharper. Her hands trembled a little when she reached for her glass. Linda said she was fine, just tired, said she hadn't been sleeping well. Halfway through the meal, she stood up to use the restroom. She didn't make it far. She collapsed near the hostess stand, hit the floor so fast no one caught her. Paramedics were called. The restaurant fell quiet. Yolanda screamed her name. Vanessa dialed 911. She came to in the back of an ambulance, asking what day it was. At the ER, doctors ran a full panel. Blood work, CT scans, vitals. Everything came back clear. No alcohol, no drugs, no trauma. Her pressure was slightly low. The official note read, exhaustion. They sent her home with iron supplements and instructions to hydrate. She didn't argue, but the symptoms didn't stop. They changed. The following week, Linda told Vanessa her vision felt off. Letters blurred when she read emails. Her eyes took longer to focus. Then she began misplacing items. She set her keys in the refrigerator. She missed a meeting she herself had scheduled. One night, she couldn't find her way out of the parking lot at her own gym. Then came the weight loss. Her appetite was shrinking, but her body shrank faster. 10 pounds, then 15. In the span of 2 months, her wardrobe stopped fitting. Her sleep broke into short, restless windows. She'd wake up gasping. She started to forget the names of junior staff she had mentored for years. Through it all, Tyrone stayed by her side. He made her tea in the mornings, helped her walk to the bathroom, took her phone calls, booked her appointments, drove her when she said she felt dizzy, bought her vitamins, even ran lavender baths on nights she couldn't sleep. From the outside, he looked like a dream caregiver. Quiet, patient, present. But behind closed doors, pieces weren't adding up. A used syringe was found in the guest bathroom drawer. Linda assumed it was leftover from one of his supplements. He brushed it off, said it was part of his intermittent fasting regimen. Nothing serious. One night, Vanessa took out the trash for him while Linda rested on the couch. Inside the kitchen bin, she noticed something strange. Crumpled packaging from nicotine patches. several of them. Linda didn't smoke, hadn't touched cigarettes in over 20 years. Tyrone had always said he never touched nicotine. She didn't say anything. Not yet. Then came the camera footage. Linda's security system, motion-triggered, mounted discreetly in the garage, picked up movement around 1:47 a.m. Tyrone, wearing gloves, walked to his car carrying a small brown pouch. He didn't see the camera. He placed the pouch under the seat, looked around, then drove off. He returned an hour later. Same gloves, same pouch, his expression blank. Linda never saw that footage. Vanessa did 2 weeks later. And by that point, Linda had already started slurring her speech. She was missing days at work, calling staff by the wrong names. One morning she woke up and couldn't recall where she was. She had lived in that house for 12 years. The body was failing, but the scans kept coming back clean. The symptoms didn't fit any clear diagnosis. And still, every time Linda looked at Tyrone, her husband, the man who tucked her in at night, she saw comfort, not danger. She told Yolanda, he's the only one who hasn't changed. But the truth was he had never changed. He had just always known exactly what he was doing. Yolanda Freeman booked a one-way flight to Atlanta on June 5th. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't told Linda. But after their last video call, after watching her sister forget the name of the medication she had been taking for weeks, she knew something was wrong. The weight loss, the trembling, the vacant look behind her usually sharp eyes. It wasn't burnout, and it wasn't aging. When she arrived, Linda was lying on the couch, bundled in a thick throw blanket in the middle of summer. Her skin was pale, her voice thin. Tyrone greeted Yolanda at the door like nothing was wrong, like Linda hadn't just lost another 7 pounds in 3 weeks. Yolanda didn't waste time. She followed him into the kitchen, waited until they were alone, and said, straight to his face, I don't know what's going on here, but if I find out you're hurting her, I swear I'll drag it into the light. Tyrone didn't flinch. He smiled, said, you should rest. I'll bring you some tea. Later that night, Yolanda sat with Linda in her bedroom, the same room they had giggled in during sleepovers as girls. Linda looked up and whispered, he treats me like I'm gold. But Yolanda didn't see gold. She saw fear and silence and something else, compliance. The next morning, Linda collapsed again. Her speech slurred. Her knees gave out in the hallway. Yolanda called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors ran another full panel. Again, nothing added up. But this time, a nurse pulled Yolanda aside. Quietly, carefully, she said, we've flagged some inconsistencies. We've requested a psych consult. Not for your sister, for the husband. When Yolanda asked why, the nurse paused, lowered her voice and said, too many answers that don't match. Too many signatures that look coached. Too much control. But before the evaluation could happen, Linda intervened. She signed herself out against advice. She told the attending physician she didn't need more tests. She told Yolanda to back off. She said, you think you're protecting me, but all you're doing is tearing down the only person who stood by me. Tyrone drove her home. Yolanda stayed behind, watching the taillights disappear into traffic. Back at the house, Tyrone moved carefully. He made soup. He brought her medication. He stayed off his phone. But what Linda didn't know, what no one had seen yet, was what he had been hiding for months. It was Monday, July 25th, when Linda Freeman collapsed again. This time, it happened in her home office sometime after 10 a.m. She hadn't eaten yet. She had just logged onto her laptop to review quarterly forecasts for a partner firm. Tyrone said he found her slumped sideways in her desk chair, unconscious, shallow breathing. He called 911. At the hospital, she stayed unresponsive for 36 hours. Blood tests were ordered again. This time, they showed something different. Elevated nicotine levels. Not mild. Not trace amounts. High. Enough to raise red flags. When the toxicologist asked if she smoked, the nurse answered first. Number she hasn't smoked in over 20 years. Linda regained consciousness on Wednesday afternoon, dazed but coherent. When she was told about the nicotine, she looked confused. She said, I don't even allow smoking in my house. No one could explain it. The attending physician asked if she used any patches, gums, or oils. She shook her head. She was discharged that evening, still weak, her muscles tight, her weight down another 4 pounds. A visiting nurse was scheduled for the week. The order included daily vitals, home checks, and meal monitoring. The next morning, the nurse arrived at 9 a.m. Tyrone answered the door and told her they wouldn't need the service anymore. Said Linda was resting. Said she preferred privacy. The nurse asked to see her just to confirm. Tyrone said she was asleep. He said he'd take care of everything himself. From that point forward, no one but Tyrone saw her in person. But the texts continued. Vanessa received the first one at 12:34 p.m. on Thursday. He's being sweet. Too sweet. Bringing me breakfast in bed. Keeps smiling like it's my birthday. Vanessa tried to joke, then paused. Something didn't sit right. She replied, "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Linda responded, "Just strange. Like he's trying too hard." Friday, the text shifted again. Less light. "Tea tastes metallic today," she wrote. "My lipsticks taste weird lately." Vanessa asked if she was okay. Linda sent back a laughing emoji. "I'm fine. Just noticing things." By Saturday, Vanessa stopped laughing. She called. No answer. She texted again. "You need to call the police. Now something isn't right." 1 week later, at 3:18 a.m., Tyrone placed a call to 911. His voice was shaking but controlled. He told the dispatcher, "My wife won't wake up. I tried shaking her. She's cold." The first EMS unit arrived at 3:26 a.m. They found Linda lying flat on her back in bed, eyes closed, hands at her sides. She was wearing a clean silk nightgown. No signs of struggle. No physical trauma. Her pulse was absent. Skin temperature was below baseline. Tyrone was kneeling beside her, pressing down on her chest. The paramedic asked when he started CPR. He said, "Just now." His hand placement was wrong. One hand was on her collarbone. The other was hovering near her stomach. The team took over. Oxygen mask. Defibrillator pads. They tried for 20 minutes. At 3:48 a.m., Linda Freeman was pronounced dead. Tyrone sat on the floor against the wall, rocking back and forth, crying loudly. At the hospital, he wailed when they asked if had any known health conditions. He said no. She was strong, just tired. But when investigators reviewed body cam footage from the scene and hospital security footage, something stood out. No tear marks, no red eyes, no facial strain. One of the investigators noted in the preliminary report, no signs of acute emotional response. Reactions appeared learned, not reflexive. A toxicology order was placed on site. Linda's body was transferred for a full postmortem. And back at the house, even before the autopsy results came in, investigators began looking at the kitchen, the tea cabinet, the trash. Because what they found next would explain everything. The call from the coroner came just before noon on a Thursday. Linda Freeman's cause of was officially ruled a homicide. The report was clear. Catastrophic nicotine toxicity, made worse by an overdose of sleeping medication. But what made it undeniable was the injection site. Small, just beneath the back of her hairline, like someone meant to hide it. The dose wasn't something she could have absorbed by accident. It was concentrated, deliberate, and lethal. Detectives reviewed her file again. They pulled her pharmacy records, no nicotine-based prescriptions, no sleeping medication on file. And Linda didn't smoke, not socially, not in private, not ever. They went back to her devices, scanned her emails, and that's where the first thread unraveled. A chain of messages between Linda and her financial advisor showed she had updated her existing $1.5 million life insurance policy on January 16th, just weeks after her wedding. The request seemed routine. What stood out was a second thread from a different email, one that didn't use her full name. In that thread, someone posing as her initiated a second $1 million policy through another provider. That application listed a separate mailing address, a P.O. box in South Fulton, opened under the name Trevor Madison. When they requested surveillance from the mailing center, the footage showed Tyrone. Clear as day. Walked in. He'd opened the box. Walked out with the envelope. Inside that envelope, a signed confirmation of the second policy's activation. Monthly premiums already paid. Investigators followed the trail. That's when they noticed the outgoing bank transfers. $2,000 sent every 4 weeks to a Savannah woman named Kendra Bell. The name meant nothing to Linda's family, but meant everything to Tyrone. Phone records showed nearly 37 calls to Kendra in the last 2 months of Linda's life. Some of the calls lasted over an hour, and when they spoke to Kendra, she admitted it. She and Tyrone had 2 children together. He wasn't just in touch, he was supporting them. But even with the motive, even with the money trail, there was still one problem. There were no fingerprints on the syringe cap found in the trash. The gloves they believed were used were never recovered. The final dose, the one that ended Linda's life, couldn't be placed directly in his hands. Without that, the DA's office said they couldn't move forward with charges. And Linda's will? Still valid. Tyrone was named as sole heir to her estate. That included the house, the car, the remaining assets. And until they could prove otherwise, the law was on his side. He stayed in the house where she died, cooked in the kitchen she once loved, slept in the same bed, answered the same door when investigators came with more questions. And every time he smiled at them, it looked almost too calm. Later, in 2022, a letter arrived on a rainy Monday. Tyrone stood at the mailbox in his robe, still half asleep, coffee in hand. It was from the life insurance company. He tore it open expecting a check. Instead, he found a single-page denial. Linda Freeman had changed her beneficiary. Weeks before her death, she'd walked into her attorney's office without telling a soul. She named Yolanda Freeman, her sister, as the sole recipient of both her existing $1.5 million policy and the newly added one. The change had been finalized, notarized, and sealed. Tyrone's name was gone. He didn't speak about it. But the next day, he submitted paperwork to liquidate Linda's retirement accounts. That's when things started to fall apart. The company reviewing the request flagged his credentials. His employee file showed degrees from Princeton and Wharton. But a simple verification email came back. No record of attendance. Not at either institution. Not under any name. They kept digging. Tyrone's HR forms, his tax paperwork, even his emergency contacts, were traced back to one IP address. His own. He'd forged nearly every document from day one. It was enough to trigger a federal alert. The FBI opened a case for wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. Investigators began combing through every asset, every email, every fake title he had ever claimed. Meanwhile, the fallout hit home. Kendra Bell stopped answering his calls. The children he sent money to, the payments stopped. So did the pictures. So did the "I miss you" texts. The last message he sent read, "You said you'd stand by me." It was marked as read, but no one ever responded. His employer, under pressure, issued an immediate termination. No severance. No appeal. The man who once walked through luxury lobbies with a briefcase and polished shoes was now hiding in a house that no longer felt like his. Vanessa said it best. "He was the love I waited my whole life for. Let him keep something of me." Tyrone Maddox never moved out. 3 months after Linda's funeral, he was still living in her home, walking the same polished floors she once danced on, cooking in the same kitchen she had filled with fresh herbs and almond milk, and sleeping in the bed where she took her last breath. The house, still legally his, had not been seized or frozen. No charges meant no interruptions. It was his for now. He didn't redecorate. He didn't repaint. He didn't remove a single photo. Instead, he logged into Airbnb, uploaded bright, wide-angle photos of Linda's master bedroom, and listed it under the name Elegant Suite in Historic Home. Strangers paid to stay in her room, sleep in her sheets, sit at her desk. The mirror still held her sticky notes. The closet still held her scent. He didn't touch a thing except the bank account that paid the bills. He wasn't working. The firm had fired him after the fraud surfaced. His side relationship vanished the minute the investigation began. The money dried up. No insurance payout. No retirement. Nothing but the walls she left behind. Yolanda Freeman, furious and grieving, filed a civil lawsuit in June 2022. She wanted the house seized, the accounts frozen, the marriage declared void due to fraud. Her lawyers laid out everything. Linda's revised will, the forged employment records, the stolen funds. But the case crawled through the system. Tyrone didn't show up to the first 2 hearings. He submitted no defense. He just stayed put. He lived each day in silence, each night in shadows. The neighbors no longer greeted him. Visitors avoided the block. Some said the house felt cold, like it knew what happened. Guests who stayed in the rented room left strange reviews, mentioning locked doors that clicked in the night and a man who spoke through the walls. One simply wrote, "Felt like someone was still here." And someone was, because even though Linda Freeman was gone, her presence hadn't left. Her photos still smiled from the mantel. Her voice still echoed in voice notes saved in his phone. Her ghost, whether real or imagined, hovered over everything. And for Tyrone Maddox, that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was that every night, when he turned off the lights and tried to sleep, he didn't just hear the creak of old floors. Story 3. It was supposed to be a counseling session, nothing more, a moment of guidance, a pastor doing what pastors do. He said he just wanted to help. He said they needed direction. He said it was spiritual. And at first, everyone believed him. The door was closed, the lights were dimmed, the voices were low. But no one questioned it, because when a man wears a collar and holds a Bible, people assume the room is safe. What happened behind that door didn't start with violence. It started with trust, with silence. With a shift so small, no one felt it until it was far too late. He wasn't supposed to cross that line, but he did. And once he did, nothing could ever be undone. Jeremy Spence was born on August 17, 1981, in Montgomery, Alabama. He never really knew his father. He had a name, Leon, but not a memory. No bedtime stories, no fishing trips. Just a single photo in a cracked brown frame. A tall man with gold teeth, standing next to a car that didn't belong to him. Jeremy was 9 when he finally understood his father wasn't coming back. He stopped asking questions the same year his voice changed. His mother, Denise, did everything she could. She worked mornings at the bus depot, nights cleaning office buildings. On Sundays, she ironed both their clothes and marched them down to Greater First Missionary Baptist Church. No matter how tired she was, no matter how much Jeremy complained. The pews were hard, the sermons long, but she always sat with her hand on his shoulder like she was keeping him from drifting too far. There was no luxury in their home, but there was order. The Bible stayed open on the kitchen counter. Shoes were never worn inside, and Denise had a rule. You make your bed before you ask for anything else in this life. But boys don't stay boys forever, and poverty doesn't wait for permission to shape you. By 13, Jeremy had figured out that respect on his block didn't come from being polite. It came from being feared. He started running with older boys, watched how they made money, watched how they got attention. And he wanted both. By 15, he stopped going to youth group and started sneaking out. Denise would wait up, sitting in the living room with her robe still on, staring at the door until he walked in. She never raised her voice. She just asked the same question every time. Is this who I raised? Jeremy never had the courage to answer. There were moments, though, short ones, where the softness came back, when they sat on the porch during a thunderstorm, when she rubbed his head after a long day, when she told him, "You're going to preach one day, Jay, not like those men on TV, you're going to reach the ones nobody else wants." He laughed at her back then. He couldn't see past the block, past the impulse, past the night. When he turned 18, he left home without saying goodbye. No college, no plan, just a belief that he could figure life out as it came. He didn't realize until years later that when you leave broken, you tend to collect more cracks along the way. The street life didn't swallow him, but it did stain him. The addiction didn't start with drugs. It started with control, the feeling of being wanted, the power in being chosen, even if it was by the hour. At first it was strip clubs, then escort websites, then chat rooms with no names, no rules, no shame. It was a secret no one knew, but one that always followed him. His mother passed away in 2007. A stroke. Jeremy didn't make it to the hospital in time. He sat by her bed for hours after, holding the same hand that used to keep him steady on Sunday mornings. That night, he opened her Bible and found a note inside. Don't let the fire in you burn down what God wants to build. By the time Jeremy turned 25, he had learned how to keep two versions of himself alive. The one who smiled at strangers, opened doors for women, and always seemed to have the right words. And the one who moved through the night like it owed him something. A man with a habit, but not the kind you could see on his skin or smell on his breath. He met Jandice Rollins at a birthday dinner in Montgomery. She was a pre-med student at Alabama State. Soft-spoken, beautiful in a quiet way, wore her hair natural, said she didn't believe in fairy tales, but she still believed in love. Jeremy didn't expect her to say yes to coffee the next day, but she did, and for the first time in a long time, he found himself hoping that maybe he didn't have to be broken forever. They dated for almost 2 years, Sunday walks after church, picnics in Oak Park, nights on the phone till both their voices faded into silence. Jandice made him feel normal, grounded. She challenged his impulses. She prayed with him, believed in the version of him he hadn't become yet. But Jeremy was still hiding, still driving across county lines to avoid recognition, still paying for rooms he never stayed the whole night in. He'd smile at Jandice on Saturday, then disappear into the back streets of Birmingham on Sunday night. Each time he promised himself it was the last. Each time it wasn't. She found out slowly, an ATM withdrawal at a sketchy gas station, a cologne she didn't wear left on the passenger seat, a motel receipt folded in his jeans. When she asked, he didn't lie. He told her the truth, but not all of it. Said he was struggling, said he was trying. The final straw came 6 days before their engagement photos were supposed to be taken. Jandice showed up at a motel on Atlanta Highway after her friend tipped her off. Room 312. He was in there with a woman. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at him like she was watching something die. That night, she returned his ring. Left it on the Bible he hadn't opened in months. She told him, I can't heal what you keep feeding. You don't need a wife. You need a funeral for the man you keep pretending you buried. Jeremy never saw her again. After she left, the visits didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. The loneliness made everything louder. The shame turned into recklessness. He stopped calling his mom, stopped showing up for work. And by the end of that year, he was so deep in it. He couldn't remember the last time he went a full week without paying someone just to feel like he mattered. One night, he met an evangelism group that encouraged him to change his ways. He decided to relocate to Florida, leaving the past behind. February 2004. He stepped off the bus in Lakeland, Florida, just after sunrise. It was humid, sticky in a way that clung to the skin like memory. Jeremy Spence didn't know a single person in town. He had no job lined up, no friends, no backup plan, just a folded address in his back pocket and the hope that starting over meant something here. The church wasn't much to look at, just a faded sign that read Grace Temple Revival Center, tucked between an abandoned laundromat and a pawn shop. The parking lot had cracks. The building needed paint. But when Jeremy pushed the door open that Sunday morning, the choir was already singing like the roof didn't matter. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat in the back pew, quiet, watching, listening. After service, one of the elders, Mother Geraldine, a woman with silver hair and a voice like gravel, walked up to him and said, God told me you came here to serve, not sit, am I right? Jeremy nodded, barely. And that was the beginning. He started small, cleaning chairs after midweek Bible study, mopping floors on Saturdays, handing out flyers in parking lots for revivals that barely filled 3 rows. No one asked where he came from. No one cared about his past. They just saw a man who worked like he owed God something. And maybe he did. Weeks turned into months and Jeremy never missed a service. Never complained. Never left early. He read the scriptures slowly, like he was learning to breathe again. When the pastor asked for volunteers, Jeremy's hand was the first in the air. Set up, tear down, Sunday school supplies, baptism towels. He was always there. There were nights he'd stay late just to sweep the sanctuary alone. Headphones in, listening to gospel music until the custodian had to lock up. He didn't need a microphone. He didn't want attention. What he needed was to feel clean again. And service made him feel that way. The elders noticed. So did the congregation. A few months in, the pastor handed Jeremy a clipboard and asked him to oversee the men's prayer breakfasts. "I don't need a preacher," he said. "I need someone who knows what it feels like to lose everything and still come back." Jeremy didn't flinch. He accepted the clipboard and kept his head down. He never shared the full truth. Never told them about the motel in Montgomery, about the women, the pills, the guilt. But in every testimony he gave, there was a sentence that stayed the same. "I'm not here because I made it. I'm here because mercy found me first." It wasn't long before people started asking him for advice. Young men, fathers, even the broken ones in the back row who only showed up once a month. Jeremy had a way of talking that didn't sound rehearsed. That didn't sound churchy. Sounded real. In that quiet corner of Lakeland, he became a man again. Not perfect, not healed, but whole enough to start building something that wouldn't collapse under his own weight. And for the first time in years, Jeremy Spence felt like he belonged. Not to his past, but to his purpose. But purpose is a powerful thing. If you don't guard it, it becomes the very thing the enemy uses to pull you down. And Jeremy was about to find out just how easy it is to fall all over again. Jeremy was baptized in the fall of 2005. The water wasn't holy. It was lukewarm, cloudy, poured into a plastic tub behind the old sanctuary. But to Jeremy, it felt like judgment breaking off his skin. Not because he was perfect, but because for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to fake being clean. He had nothing left to hide. The church clapped. They always clapped. But it wasn't noise he heard that day. It was his mother's voice. The one that used to whisper, "You're gonna preach one day, Jay," while folding his t-shirts and praying over an empty dinner table. He stood in that water with his head bowed, hands trembling, and promised God, out loud, that he would never go back. Not to the rooms, not to the addiction, not to the man who lived in shadows and shame. If he ever got another chance, he'd build something that lasted. And not long after, he met Monica Reese. She was the kind of woman who didn't chase attention, but still got it. Strong in silence. Raised in Jacksonville, moved to Lakeland after nursing school. She had a quiet testimony and a guarded smile. She'd been through heartbreak, too. The kind you don't post about. The kind that makes you question if God hears you at all. They met during midweek revival. Jeremy was restocking chairs. Monica stayed behind to clean up communion trays. No sparks, no flirting, just a short conversation about tired legs and why nobody ever volunteers to sweep under the altar. But it grew from there. He asked her to coffee. She said no. Then maybe. Then yes. After a month. Their relationship wasn't flashy. It was intentional. Slow. Built on accountability and prayer meetings, not late-night promises. Monica had one rule. Don't lie to me, and don't lie to yourself. If you're not healed, say so. If you're still tempted, let me know. Jeremy told her everything. About Jandice, the motel nights, the anonymous women, the HIV scares that turned out negative. The things he did when nobody was looking. He expected her to leave, but she didn't. She told him, if God's grace was enough for you, who am I to withhold mine? They got married in June 2006. No big wedding. No tuxedos. Just 40 people. Folding chairs in a church basement, and a wooden cross behind them. Jeremy wore a rented suit. Monica wore her mother's pearls. And as they held hands, Jeremy whispered, "Let's build something no devil can tear down." That same night, they talked about starting a ministry of their own. Not a church full of lights and cameras. Place for real people. Broken people. People like who they used to be. It would be called New Revival Ministries. They didn't have the money, didn't have the space, but they had the vision. Jeremy printed flyers on an old home printer. Monica cooked for Bible study in their kitchen. The first service was held in a rented community hall. 6 people came. 2 left early. 1 fell asleep. But Jeremy didn't flinch. He preached like the room was full. He preached like the old hymn was still listening. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the reason he survived. What he didn't know was that his biggest test wouldn't come from the outside world. It would come from a place much closer, much younger, and when it knocked, it wouldn't knock alone. Celine was born in December of 2006, right in the middle of Florida's coldest winter in 5 years. Jeremy held her in his arms for the first time in the corner of a borrowed hospital room, wrapped in a second-hand blanket, eyes wide, silent. Monica said she looked just like him. Jeremy said nothing. He was crying too hard. They named her after his grandmother, the only woman besides his mother who ever made him believe in gentleness. From the moment she came into the world, Jeremy made a vow. No long speeches, no dramatic promises, just a quiet whisper in her ear. You will never know the man I used to be. And for a long time, she didn't. Celine was his pride, his soft spot, his motivation to stay clean, stay married, stay on the path. The church never saw him lose his temper when she spilled juice on his sermon notes. They didn't see the nights he stayed up rehearsing how to explain death, fear, and faith to a 5-year-old. They only saw a man who loved his daughter like she held the last thread between him and heaven. He brought her to Bible study, one hand on her backpack, the other on his worn leather Bible. When she turned 7, he let her read the opening prayer one Wednesday night. Her voice shook, but Jeremy cried anyway. The congregation clapped. He just closed his eyes. At home, she sat beside him on the floor while he outlined sermons, colored pictures while he fasted, asked big questions with small words. Daddy, why does God forgive us? Why do people still hurt if they pray every night? He never had perfect answers, but she asked anyway, and he loved that. Jeremy always said Celine was his second chance in human form. But as new revival ministries grew, so did Jeremy's reputation. His name traveled. Invitations poured in from across the state. Miami, Tampa, even Atlanta. He started preaching at conferences with thousands in attendance. Clips of him laying hands on weeping men went viral. He wasn't just a local preacher anymore. He was a regional celebrity. The nickname came from a teenager in the third row. That man walks like fire. It stuck. From flyers to Facebook Lives, the title followed him. The Walking Fire. He preached like every sentence carried weight, like each word could break a curse or heal a wound. And for a while, it looked like he had found the perfect balance. Father, husband, shepherd. He wore the robe, carried the cross, raised his daughter, and filled rooms every Sunday. But the truth about fire is it draws people in, and not everyone who stands close to it wants to be saved. They were the kind of girls you noticed before the first note of the choir even hit the mic. Lip gloss that shimmered under the sanctuary lights. Nails that clicked against their phones as they texted in the back row. Sneakers instead of heels. Eye rolls instead of amen. Tiffany and Jessica didn't look like church girls, and they never tried to. Both were 16. Both came in late and left early. And both had reputations that moved faster than their own shadows. They weren't on the usher board. They didn't memorize scripture. But somehow they always found their way back to new revival ministries. Whether it was youth night, prayer meetings, or Sunday services packed with sweating bodies and hands raised high. They came not for doctrine but for space. And in Jeremy's church, space was always free. They sat on the edge of the pews, never too close, never too far, laughing under their breath during altar call, whispering when the Spirit moved. People noticed. The older women shook their heads. The elders turned their gaze. But Jeremy didn't say much. Not at first. He believed in giving grace, even when it looked like rebellion. What most people didn't know was that both girls had come through the church's outreach program. Free meals, back-to-school drives, Bible camp scholarships funded by anonymous donations. New Revival had become a kind of lifeline for kids who came from places the system didn't remember. Tiffany lived with her grandmother. Her mother had moved to Georgia 3 years prior and never came back. Her father? She didn't ask about him anymore. Jessica's mom worked 2 jobs, nurse by day, waitress by night. She slept most Sundays. Jessica came to church alone. Neither girl had a curfew. Neither had structure. They had learned early that growing up meant looking out for yourself, no matter who got left behind. Celine met them at Tingy Choir rehearsal. At first, it was just polite conversation. What school you go to, what apps you're on, who's cute, who's lame. But soon they were walking home together, sharing snacks, laughing too loud during prayer meetings. Monica noticed the shift. Celine's wardrobe changed. So did her tone. But when she asked questions, the answers were always short. Jeremy heard them once. The three of them in the foyer after service. They didn't see him nearby. He heard a curse word, then another, then something about skipping practice to meet up with a boy whose name Jeremy didn't recognize. That night, he said nothing. But as soon as they got home, he told Monica, "She's not hanging with those girls anymore. Talk to her." Monica agreed. She believed in balance. But she also believed in giving Celine the chance to choose right, not just be told. Jeremy wasn't convinced. He had seen too much, done too much, and the last thing he wanted was for the girl he prayed for to become a version of the women he used to pay for. So the next Sunday after service, he waited. As they walked past, he stopped them. He smiled, invited them to his office, said he just wanted to talk, said it wouldn't take long. And just like that, the door closed behind them. He watched them as they giggled down the aisle in skirts too short for sanctuary comfort, heels clacking against the tile like they owned the room. It started the way most compromises do. Small, quiet, disguised as something noble. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sanctuary was nearly empty. A few volunteers lingered near the foyer, folding programs and stacking chairs. But Jeremy wasn't in a hurry to leave. He waited, pacing behind his office door, checking his watch without really needing to. When Tiffany and Jessica walked past, he called out to them. Calm, almost casual. "You got a second?" They glanced at each other, then followed him in. The door shut behind them with a soft click. No one noticed. No one asked. Inside the office, Jeremy didn't sit behind his desk. He stood, arms crossed, tone measured. "Listen, I've seen y'all with my daughter, and I don't like what I'm seeing." The girls went quiet. "You come in late. You dress like you're headed to a party, not God's house. And the language I heard last week. I don't want that around Celine. If you can't respect what I'm building here, I'm gonna need y'all to keep your distance." There was a pause. Then Tiffany spoke, voice soft but bold. "We get it, Pastor. We know we've been wild, but maybe we want to change. Maybe we just need someone to show us how." Jessica nodded, adding, "Nobody ever taught us how to be that kind of girl. We figured maybe you could." Jeremy hesitated. The words hit him differently than expected. It wasn't defiance. It was need. And need was something he understood. He looked at them. Two teenage girls. Hair tied back. Gloss still fresh. Wearing pain beneath their sass. And something in him, the part that still carried shame from his past, saw not temptation, but damage. Damage he believed he could fix. He nodded slowly. "All right, if you're serious about changing, come by during the week. We'll talk. We'll pray. But understand this. This ain't a joke. I take this seriously." They agreed, smiled, thanked him, said they'd come by Tuesday. He watched them leave. Didn't say a word for almost 10 minutes. That Tuesday they showed up. After school. Just the two of them. Church doors locked. But Jeremy was already inside. They knocked. He opened. Let them in. Security cameras above the rear entrance caught it. No audio. Just two girls laughing as they followed their pastor into his office. Timestamp. 3:47 p.m. They stayed 41 minutes. It became routine after that. Tuesdays. Then Thursdays. Then sometimes a quick visit before youth choir on Fridays. They didn't always knock. They just showed up. Comfortable. Confident. Familiar. Volunteers began to notice. Whispered things they didn't want to say too loud. But no one questioned Jeremy. He was the pastor. The man of God. If he said he was mentoring troubled girls, who were they to question that? Inside the office, the conversations weren't recorded. There were no logs. No notes. Just closed blinds and silence. Jeremy told himself they were just kids. Just broken girls looking for guidance. That this was what ministry looked like sometimes. Messy. Uncomfortable. Personal. He He prayed with them, gave them books, talked about discipline, respect, worth. But week by week the lines blurred. They started dressing differently, tighter, bolder. One day, Tiffany called him Jay instead of Pastor. He laughed, said nothing. Jessica once said, "You're the only man we trust. You're like our safe place." He told himself that meant progress, that he was reaching them. But the truth was harder. They were learning him, learning what made him tense, what made him smile, what made him look up from his notes and forget the sermon entirely. And he let them, because when your past lives in your skin, it doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just sits quietly until you open the door. And Jeremy? He left that door open. It was Thursday, just past 4. The church was quiet. No choir practice. No deacons in the hall. Jeremy had finished preparing Sunday's sermon early, and was about to pack up when the knock came. Tiffany entered first, chewing gum. Jessica followed, phone in hand, scrolling through something she didn't bother to hide. Neither looked nervous. Neither asked for permission. They walked in like they belonged there. Jeremy looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. They had done this before. Came in without warning. Sat like they were back home. He didn't correct them. Not anymore. Tiffany flopped down on the couch near the window, legs crossed. Jessica stood near the bookshelf, fingers running along the spines of the dusty devotionals. There was silence at first, then laughter, then a shift. Tiffany said it softly at first, like a joke she knew he wouldn't repeat. "Pastor, you need to loosen up. You act like you've never had fun." Jeremy chuckled, nervously. He replied something about being too old for fun, about how his fun was buried with his 20s. He reached for a bottled water, anything to fill the space. Jessica closed the door behind them. No words, just a soft click. She locked it. Jeremy noticed. He looked at her, then back at Tiffany, unsure whether to speak. But he didn't. He didn't ask why. He didn't send them away. And that silence, that hesitation, was the moment everything shifted. Tiffany stood and walked toward the desk. She leaned forward, smiling. Her lip gloss shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. She wasn't quoting scripture. She wasn't asking for guidance. She just looked at him and asked a question he'd never forget. "Do you ever miss it?" He didn't answer, but his eyes did. That afternoon under the cross mounted on the office wall. Jeremy Spence, ordained minister, husband, father, shepherd, laid his hands where they did not belong. That evening, they had a threesome. It was the first part of the adventure. He told himself he didn't plan it, that it was just a moment, that the weight of years and the wear of temptation met in a split-second decision. But the truth is, it didn't happen fast. It had been building, in glances, in small jokes, in silence, tea. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. They stayed longer that day. When they left, no one saw them exit. But Jeremy didn't sit back down. He paced the room, hands shaking, shirt wrinkled, eyes empty. That night he came home late, kissed Monica on the cheek, ate dinner in silence. Celine asked if he was tired. He said yes. That was the only thing he didn't lie about. But it didn't stop there. The next week, they came again, and again, each visit longer, each conversation deeper. Touch turned to intimacy. Intimacy turned to routine. And the church office, once a place of prayer, became something else entirely. Jeremy stopped calling it ministry. He didn't call it anything. He just made space for it. Tuesdays, Thursdays, sometimes Saturdays if the calendar was light. He told himself he was in control, that he could quit any time, that no one would know. But secrets don't stay in sanctuaries. Within weeks, the girls stopped pretending too. Tiffany started texting late at night. Jessica sent photos that never got deleted. And soon, the church office wasn't enough. They suggested somewhere else. A motel across town. Cheap, quiet, cash only. He hesitated. They insisted. He agreed. The front desk clerk wrote the name. Brother Ellis. In the ledger. That's the name Jeremy gave. a name he hadn't used since his younger days, when he paid for pleasure and left before sunrise. Records show he checked in once a week, always between services, always alone, always with cash. Sometimes Tiffany came, sometimes Jessica, sometimes both. Church funds started disappearing. Tiny withdrawals under ministry expenses, gas receipts, meal reimbursements, but no one questioned it. He was the pastor. He had earned their trust. Meanwhile, Tiffany and Jessica started showing up at service with fresh lace fronts and glittered acrylics that caught the light during worship. One had a brand new iPhone she showed off during announcements. The other walked in with a designer bag people knew she couldn't afford. And when the elders exchanged glances, the girls just smiled, wide and shameless. It didn't take long for whispers to reach the pulpit. But Jeremy heard them before they reached him. He saw them first, before anyone else did. The clues, the changes, the red flags that flapped louder every week. He noticed the sharp looks from the older members, the raised eyebrows when the girls sat too close to the front. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt since his addiction days. Panic. He started preaching louder, sharper. Messages that once flowed with compassion now came with heat. Every sermon became about purity, restraint, holiness. He looked straight into the crowd as he shouted verses about the dangers of the flesh. His voice trembled at the end of each line, because somewhere in the crowd they were watching. Tiffany sat with her arms folded, chewing gum, unbothered. Jessica played with her keys like she was timing the moment she'd walk out. They didn't flinch. They didn't blink. They just listened. And Jeremy kept unraveling. He began withdrawing from Monica. No more late-night talks about the church. No more slow Sunday mornings with Celine. No more praying together in the living room. Instead, he locked himself in his office at home, staring at the same verses over and over, hoping the word could do what his willpower clearly couldn't. Monica noticed. She noticed everything. First, the overdraft account. Then the last-minute errands on nights he never used to leave. He forgot dinner once. Celine's school recital another time. When she asked what was going on, he snapped, "I'm carrying too much. You wouldn't understand." But the truth was she did understand. She just wanted him to admit it. One night, while folding laundry, Monica looked up and asked him softly, "Are you hiding something from me?" Jeremy didn't look away from the TV. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Why would I?" But his hands were shaking. And Monica saw that too. August 2021. He hadn't planned to go. It was one of those appointments you put off until your own reflection starts asking questions you don't want to answer. Jeremy booked the clinic visit under a different name. Jeremiah Ellis, an old pseudonym from a time he'd rather forget. A small office 2 towns over, one with no connections to the church. No chance of familiar eyes. Just a waiting room, a clipboard, and a blood draw. He told himself it was just stress. He hadn't been sleeping. He'd lost a few pounds. Maybe it was burnout. Maybe the guilt was finally showing up in his body. The tests were routine. Blood pressure, vitals, full panel screening. The nurse was polite, efficient. Never looked him in the eye too long. Jeremy kept checking the clock like it could slow the truth down. When it was over, the nurse smiled, handed him a generic pamphlet and said, "We'll call you in a few days with the results." He thanked her and walked out like nothing was wrong. 3 days later, the call came while he was alone at the church. He almost let it ring out. The doctor's voice was calm but slower than before. He asked to confirm Jeremy's identity. Then there was a pause. And then the words came. "Your results returned positive for HIV. A second test confirmed it." Jeremy didn't respond. He stared at the wall as if the paint might peel back and offer another answer. "It did not come from your wife," the doctor continued. "I'm assuming you already suspected that." Jeremy hung up without saying goodbye. He stood in the same spot for nearly 10 minutes, phone still in his hand, eyes unfocused. His hands began to sweat, then shake. He sat down in the sanctuary pews, empty, cold, quiet. The cross above him never felt farther away. He tried to pray, but nothing came out. That night, he didn't go home right away. He drove aimlessly, passed the same traffic lights twice, parked outside the old motel where it all started and didn't get out. He eventually returned home around midnight. He didn't turn on the lights, didn't eat, didn't undress. He sat on the living room couch with the same clothes he preached in that morning. Collar still buttoned, shoes still on. He stared at the wall until the silence started to echo. Then his hands dropped to his lap. And he wept. Not loudly, not violently, just the quiet kind of crying that breaks a man from the inside. Upstairs, Celine had gotten up to use the bathroom. She was halfway down the stairs when she saw him, head bowed, shoulders trembling, breathing slow and uneven. She called out softly, "Daddy?" He wiped his face, turned toward her and tried to smile. "I'm okay, baby. Go on back upstairs." But she didn't move. She came down and sat beside him without another word. He rested his hand on her back. She laid her head on his shoulder. Neither of them said anything after that. And still the weight stayed. Jeremy didn't sleep that night, because once you hear something you can't unhear, the silence that follows feels like judgment. In his mind, it wasn't a diagnosis. It was a consequence. The past finally cashing in on everything he thought he'd buried. He told himself this was punishment, but he wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. 3 weeks later, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he turned it over without thinking. The message was from Tiffany. It read, "I missed my period. Took the test." There was no emoji, no context, no follow-up. Just 5 words that made the floor beneath him feel unsteady. He sat up, staring at the screen, then turned it face down again and laid back slowly, trying to keep his breathing quiet. But his thoughts raced. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning before the sun rose, he met her in the church parking lot. Tiffany wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She stood with her arms folded, chewing gum like it was just another day. She looked him in the eye and said flatly, "You know what it is. I need money. I'm not keeping it." Jeremy didn't argue. He pulled out his wallet and gave her everything he had on him. $420 in cash. She looked down at the bills in her hand, then looked back up at him with a blank stare. "You think this is a joke? I can't do nothing with this." She turned and walked off. Jeremy stood there for a long time. 5 days later, it happened again. Another text, this time from Jessica. Same time of night. Same words. No warning. Just a screen lighting up in the dark with a truth he could no longer ignore. Now it wasn't just one mistake. It was 2. 2 girls. 2 pregnancies. 2 lives demanding answers from a man who had none. He tried to buy time, told them he needed a few days, offered to help pay for a clinic visit, sent them each another $400 through a cash app. But this time, they weren't interested in quiet solutions. They had receipts. They had records. And they wanted more. They met him behind the sanctuary one afternoon, out of sight from the congregation. Tiffany said it first. "We want $20,000 each. That's how much it's going to take to make this go away." Jessica didn't blink. She just stood there, arms crossed, nodding. When he didn't respond, Tiffany pulled her phone from her bag and started scrolling. "You think we don't got proof?" she asked. "We've got everything. Voicemails, pictures, the motel footage, even that shirt you left in room 114. Jessica added, "Don't make us ruin your church. Either we get paid or your people find out what kind of pastor you really are." Jeremy stood frozen. He wanted to speak, to reason, to pray, anything, but the words didn't come. He'd crossed too many lines, and now they were closing in. They knew about the church account, the building fund, the cash flow he controlled. "We know you've been taking money from it already," Tiffany said. "What's another $40,000? They were right. He had been skimming the account for months. Not large amounts, just enough to go unnoticed. A few hundred here for youth expenses. 1,000 there marked as community outreach. It all looked clean on paper. No one asked questions. But now the questions were being asked by people he couldn't silence. At home, Monica noticed too. She wasn't confrontational, but she wasn't blind either. She had always been the quiet bookkeeper, the one who double-checked the budget before each board meeting, the one who kept the envelopes sorted and the tithes logged. So when she saw motel charges in Lakeland on the church debit card, twice in 1 week, she didn't say anything immediately. She just filed it in her mind and waited. One night over dinner, as Jeremy pushed his food around without eating, she looked up from her plate and asked, "Did you go out of town last Tuesday?" He didn't look up. He just shook his head and said, "No." "Why?" She paused, then said, "Just wondering." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't explain, because deep down he already knew the questions wouldn't stop there. That night, she wrote the date in her notebook. Then the next one. Then the next. She started tracking everything. Every charge. Every withdrawal. Every inconsistency in his schedule. The silence between them got heavier. The distance between them grew colder. And the man who once stood before the church with fire in his eyes now flinched every time his phone lit up. The pressure was building from every side. 2 girls with evidence. A wife watching from across the table. A congregation expecting another sermon on purity while their pastor was bleeding out in private. And Jeremy was running out of exits. November 13th, 2021. Jeremy told them the money was ready. After weeks of evasion, denial and tension so heavy it kept him from sleep, he finally sent a text that offered resolution. He chose his words carefully, knowing this would be the last time they'd ever expect anything from him. He didn't say much, just a time, place, and a promise. "Meet me Thursday night. Ridge Highway Motel. Room 112. Full payment." There was no immediate reply. He put the phone down, waited, and stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, Jessica sent a thumbs-up emoji, and Tiffany followed with, "Don't be late." The motel he selected was one of the quietest spots on the edge of town, a place barely visible from the road. It sat between a shuttered diner and a mechanic shop with its windows boarded up. Jeremy had driven past it dozens of times before without a second glance. But on that Thursday, it became his destination. He checked in just after 3 p.m., under the name Brother Ellis, paid cash, and asked for a corner room. The desk clerk didn't ask questions, didn't even look up. People who came there usually didn't want to be seen. He parked his car in the back lot, away from the security camera. He carried a duffel bag into the room. Inside was a bottle of sleeping pills, 2 small plastic bags of crushed powder wrapped in tissue, a kitchen knife from the church utility drawer, and 2 bottles of cheap red wine. The room smelled like old sweat and bleach. The bedspread was thin. The ceiling fan rattled with every rotation. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wine, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, and waiting. At 6:14 p.m., the girls arrived. The security camera above the manager's office caught them stepping out of a rideshare car. Tiffany was wearing leggings and a red hoodie, texting on her phone as she walked. Jessica had on ripped jeans and oversized sunglasses. They didn't hesitate. They laughed, joked, and walked straight to room 112 like it was any other meetup. There was no fear in their steps, no hesitation in their hands as they knocked on the door. Jeremy opened it, smiled, and let them in. Instead of giving them the money, he did the unthinkable. The door closed. 37 minutes later, the same door opened again and Jeremy walked out. Alone. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He didn't look back. His face was expressionless, his shoulders straight. He climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove off into the night like a man leaving a meeting, not a crime scene. The motel remained silent until the next morning. The guests in room 114 complained around 10:30 a.m. that water had been running in the adjacent room all night, and they heard something loud, maybe a fall, followed by nothing. When the front desk sent a housekeeper to knock, there was no answer. The door remained locked. At 11:13 a.m., the manager used a master key and stepped inside. The TV was still on. A courtroom show flickered across the screen. Volume turned low. 2 plastic motel cups sat on the table. One had been knocked over, soaking into the carpet. The bathroom door was open. The lights were on. The air smelled strange, like metal and something warm. Then they saw them. Tiffany was lying face up on the bed, fully still, her arm dangling over the edge. Jessica was on the floor near the dresser, curled slightly, as if she had tried to shield herself. Her phone was still in her hand. Both girls had wounds to the neck and upper chest. One pillow was missing from the bed, later found in the bathtub soaked through. There were signs of a struggle, but it didn't look like it lasted long. The cleaner who found them didn't speak at first. When police asked what she saw, she could only say one thing. There was red everywhere. Detectives responded within 30 minutes. Officers photographed the scene, collected the wine bottles, bagged the cups, and retrieved a small plastic bag from the trash. A receipt from a nearby gas station was found in the drawer, time-stamped just 3 hours before the girls arrived. The guest log showed the name Brother Ellis had checked in, paid in cash, and requested no housekeeping. The surveillance footage confirmed what officers already suspected. Jeremy Spence had walked in with a bag and walked out without one. He had checked in alone. The girls arrived later. No one else ever entered that room. The autopsies began the morning after the crime scene was cleared. Forensics needed no second opinion. Both girls had been drugged. The toxicology reports showed traces of sedatives mixed with alcohol, strong enough to disorient, but not immediately fatal. The wine bottles collected from the motel table still had fingerprints on them, clear, undisturbed, and matching Jeremy Spence. Tiffany's body told a silent story. She was 6 weeks pregnant. Her blood work confirmed it. There was no bruising on her arms, no signs she ever saw the attack coming. She was likely unconscious by the time the knife entered her chest. 3 stab wounds, all to the upper torso, one of them piercing her heart. Jessica, though, told a different story. She was 9 weeks pregnant, and she had fought. Her fingernails were chipped, bloodied, and filled with skin cells that weren't hers. A deep scratch across her forearm suggested she tried to block the blade. The corner of the motel dresser had blood on it, hers, along with a small print in the dust that matched the pattern of her heel, as if she'd tried to push herself up. She had bruising on both wrists, a split lip, and 2 stab wounds, one in the side, one across the collarbone. The second one had punctured a major artery. Under her nails, the lab found something they didn't expect so quickly. A match. Jeremy's DNA. Not partial. Full profile. The knife retrieved from the motel room had fingerprints on the handle, and smudged blood that tested positive for all 3 individuals. His fingerprints were found on the motel faucet, the doorknob, the remote control. They found a strand of his hair lodged in the carpet next to the bathroom. Even a footprint, partial but distinct, matched the exact pair of dress shoes he wore to Wednesday night service. There was no evidence of forced entry. No sign anyone else had entered the room. Every clue pointed inward. The following Sunday, Jeremy stood before his congregation wearing a crisp black suit, Bible in hand, eyes raised to the ceiling like nothing had changed. He opened the service with a message about temptation, spoke of battles in the soul, told them God was sifting the church and that some doors had to close before blessings could arrive. He didn't know that. Just 3 rows back, a plainclothes detective sat quietly, watching every move, listening, measuring his words, because in the lab the evidence was no longer building. It had already arrived. Monica was called in for questioning that same week. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat still, holding her purse in her lap, as investigators slid the photos across the table. Motel receipts, a printout of motel surveillance, an itemized church statement showing debit card withdrawals, photos of the knife. She stared at them all, then asked one question. Was it both of them? When the officer nodded, she closed her eyes and whispered, Jesus. At home, Celine noticed her mother had stopped praying out loud. The home was quiet. No music. No family dinners. Jeremy had taken to sleeping in his office more, saying he needed clarity. What no one else saw was that clarity had already arrived, but not from Scripture. It came from the forensic team, the coroner's office, and the hours of digital evidence tying Jeremy Spence to a motel room where two teenage girls had entered and never walked out again. And soon it wouldn't be just Monica who knew, because the next knock on Jeremy's office door wouldn't be from a church member in need of prayer. It would be from the Lakeland Police Department. And this time he couldn't preach his way out. The 30th of November, 2021. The church was quiet. The sanctuary doors were locked. Jeremy had just stepped into his office, coffee in hand, when he heard the knock. He assumed it was one of the musicians arriving early for rehearsal. He didn't even flinch when he opened the door. But it wasn't music. It was a badge. 3 officers stepped in. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. One presented the warrant. The other read him his rights. Jeremy stood still, holding the edge of his desk like he couldn't feel his own legs. When they reached for his hands, he asked one question. "Can I just pray first?" The officer didn't answer. The cuffs clicked in place. Outside, members arriving for the weekend youth service watched their pastor being walked to a police cruiser in full view of the parking lot. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stared at the pavement. The mugshot was released within 2 hours. By noon, his face was on every local news broadcast in Florida. Inside the interrogation room, Jeremy didn't ask for a lawyer. Not immediately. He didn't shout or claim innocence. He just sat, slumped forward, mumbling about how everything got out of hand. He said he never meant to hurt anyone. He said the girls had threatened to destroy everything he'd built. He repeated the phrase, "I didn't plan it," more than once. Then he said something that shifted the tone of the room. "They were ruining me. I had to stop it somehow." Investigators leaned in, waiting. Jeremy didn't clarify. He just dropped his head into his hands and stayed silent. Monica was contacted the same afternoon. She was at her sister's home when the call came through. They asked if she wanted to speak to him. She didn't even hesitate. Her voice was low. "Final. Tell him not to contact me again." She gathered a few of Celine's things that night and called a moving company. She didn't want anything from the house. No furniture. No pictures. She left the wedding photo on the wall and the family Bible on the shelf. She walked out without looking back. Celine was quiet through the entire ride to her aunt's house. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. The girl who used to sing solos on Sunday now barely opened her mouth. When they pulled into the driveway, she whispered, "Can we not talk about it?" And they didn't. At least not for that night. But the world was already talking. Within 24 hours, the story exploded online. Hashtags with Jeremy's name flooded social media. Clips from his old sermons were reposted alongside headlines that made people question how no one had seen this coming. Former church members began speaking out. Some with shaky voices, others with anger. One woman posted a video crying, asking, "Was it all fake? Did he ever really believe in God?" The church board released a brief statement the next day. New Revival Ministries is officially closed indefinitely. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement. The building was locked by Monday. A week later, someone spray-painted the word liar across the main entrance. Local parents who once encouraged their children to join the youth choir now warned them to stay away from that side of town. Businesses that used to sponsor church events pulled their names from every banner and flyer. Jeremy's name was removed from city outreach programs and community leadership boards. One by one, every title he carried was stripped away. Inside the jail, Jeremy asked to see a Bible. When the officer handed it to him, he stared at the cover for a long time before opening it. He flipped past the Old Testament, then the New. He didn't stop on Psalms, didn't read Proverbs. He turned to the back where the blank pages were. Pages people usually used to write dedications or names of loved ones. He took the pen the officer had left and wrote one sentence. "I built an altar over bones." He closed the Bible and placed it beside him. He didn't speak again that day. What had started as a ministry built on fire, passion, and second chances was now reduced to broken pews and unanswered prayers. The man who had once promised redemption to others had no explanation for his own choices. And the community that once called him the walking fire now called him by his prison number. The trial opened on a cold Monday morning in February 2022. The courtroom was packed. Local news crews set up outside before sunrise. And by the time the bailiff called the court to order, every bench was filled. Some with church members who had once called him their pastor. Others with parents who wanted to make sure the man who hurt their daughters would never preach again. Jeremy walked in wearing a navy suit, wrists chained, eyes low. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at Monica. He kept his gaze on the floor as he was seated beside his defense attorney. The prosecution didn't waste time. They opened with the facts. 2 dead girls, both underage, both pregnant, both connected to a man who had sworn to lead them in faith. The prosecutor described it plainly. No drama, no need for theatrics, just a timeline of events backed by surveillance footage, motel records, phone logs, and DNA. Evidence no one could dispute. Then came the voice recordings, the voicemails, the texts. One read aloud in court. "We need the money by Friday or we send everything. Don't test us." The room fell silent. Jessica's mother sat in the front row, clutching a photo of her daughter in a white choir robe. She didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead with her jaw clenched. The defense tried a different angle. They argued that Jeremy had experienced a mental breakdown, that the combination of guilt, HIV diagnosis, ministry pressure, and unresolved childhood trauma had clouded his judgment. They spoke about his overdose years ago, the addiction he overcame, and how the weight of failure had returned with force he couldn't handle. They never claimed he was innocent. They just asked the jury to consider his state of mind when everything collapsed. But the jury didn't blink. Over the course of 4 days, the courtroom heard testimony from forensic experts, former church members, financial auditors, and Monica herself. When she took the stand, her voice was steady. "I knew something was wrong," she said, "but I never thought he was capable of that. Never." She was asked if Jeremy ever confessed. She shook her head and said he confessed by hiding. Then came the moment that changed the room. Jessica's mother stood and requested to speak. The judge allowed it. She stepped forward, trembling, holding the photo she hadn't put down since day one. She didn't speak for the first few seconds, just stared at Jeremy, then said quietly, he was supposed to save her, not silence her. She turned to the jury. "I don't want revenge. I want truth. And if there's still justice left in this country, I want it to find him today." Her words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the room like concrete. The deliberation took just under 3 hours. The jury returned. No emotion on their faces. No need for drama. The foreperson stood. "We find the defendant, Jeremy Spence, guilty. Guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty of unlawful relations with a minor. Guilty of abuse of spiritual authority. Guilty of financial fraud. The sentence, 30 years in state prison. No possibility of parole." Jeremy didn't speak, didn't react, didn't cry. He just nodded once, like a man who finally accepted the weight of the tomb he built with his own hands. Outside the courtroom, people gathered behind barricades. Some held signs with the girls' names. Others shouted scripture. Reporters tried to push in, but most of the crowd stayed silent, watching as Jeremy was led into a van bound for a prison on the outskirts of the county. The courtroom emptied slowly. Jessica's mother was the last to leave. She walked past the gallery, past the reporters, past the cameras, still holding her daughter's photo, because the verdict wasn't just about Jeremy. It was about all the people who trusted him, all the prayers he turned into lies, and all the girls who sat on the pew's edge, just trying to feel seen. Within a week, Monica filed for divorce. She didn't announce it publicly. She didn't need to. The filing showed up in local papers, right between a church auction listing and a fundraiser ad for a missing dog. That's how far his name had fallen. Reduced to a byline no one read out loud anymore. Celine turned 16 that year. She skipped her birthday. No cake, no friends. Just a quiet evening at her aunt's, where even the family Bible stayed closed. People asked if she'd speak out, if she'd testify again, if she'd ever tell her side. But she didn't. Not then. Not yet. and maybe never. The church building, once filled with choirs and Sunday suits, was sold at a loss. The pews were removed, the pulpit discarded. A real estate sign stood in front of the sanctuary for 4 months before a wellness center bought the property. The cross came down quietly on a Tuesday morning while the street was still waking up. But something else rose in its place. The victims' families, still reeling from the trauma, launched a nonprofit called Save Our Girls, a space for exploited youth, a place for mentorship, education, shelter. Their first event was a candlelight vigil. No sermons, no speakers, just 2 chairs draped in choir robes and lit with names. Tiffany and Jessica. They didn't ask for donations, just attention, because they knew what it cost to be ignored. Jeremy's name faded from headlines soon after, but the damage didn't. Some wounds bleed in silence. Others echo in the pews long after the building is gone. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.